I said, no, it doesn't work that way. So we straightened it out, and the kids are able to do their thing.
Wow, first try. That usually doesn't work. Yeah.
Live yet?
It will be in just a second. Then I got to start doing a little
So
work.
what happened was East and some girl had one on. This big lawsuit cost them millions of
first try.
dollars. They
That
lost
usually doesn't
anyway. I told them they would.
Yeah.
Live yet?
It
High
will
school
be in
kids,
just a second.
boobies
Then I
out
got to
of
start
shape.
doing a little
So
work.
what happens is East and some
Hang on.
anyway. I told them they would.
Yeah.
High
Something
school
is
kids,
wrong.
boobies
Then I
out
got
of
to start
shape.
doing a
So
little
what
work.
happens is East and some.
There it is. Yeah. There we go. We were feeding back. Whenever you think you're going to go live, do it early. Something will go wrong. I have been doing this for nearly 40 years. Something goes wrong every bloody week.
I'm humble
And we
enough to
have
realize
sussed this stuff out more times than I can tell you.
I'm humble enough to know I'm not doing anything live yet.
Something goes wrong. Nearly every
recorded podcast, and then we'll see.
It's absolutely nuts. I'm gonna fix this because I'm sorry, starting to get a headache. Yeah, something goes pear-shaped almost every week. It is mind-numbing how something will go wrong. Just about every week. You see three things. If you have the participants edge of your Zoom open, you'll see three folks there. You, me, and my dear friend Franz Messerschmidt from Schuylkill County. He was the chair in Lebanon County, and he was the last chairperson to actually hold Democratic control of what is now a very, very red Lebanon County. And the best way for him to listen in is to zoom in, and then he listens. He has actually taken part in the program previously, but normally he listens in. That's what we need to do. Okay. Now, so here comes the boing, boing, boing chariot bits. Headaches usually don't come until much later in the program. You will notice I've got a lot going on. I tend to monitor.
Yeah, I'm wondering if I ought
I
not to
watch.
take my hearing aids out.
That's entirely up to you.
Well, I tried, there's all these settings on it. I'm just getting used to it. I've had them about 3 months. I shot a lot of shotguns when I grew up, Peter. So the doctor tells me I'm borderline cochlear implant. He couldn't believe it when he was talking to me. He said, I go over the counter. He did the hearing test. He was blasting me at 85 decibels, which is 3/4 of a shotgun blast. I couldn't hear it. At 8 tones, I'm deaf in both ears, the lower 4, and the other ones are just above borderline.
So for me, especially being live as opposed to recording, I want to see what's happening on the live bit.
Mm-hmm.
So this is in real time. This is with delay. But this is also where I can monitor the comments, questions in real time. I also can monitor it from here. I can bounce back and forth. I can check the email box. I can check the phone calls. I can do everything. There's a lot happening. Sometimes there's nothing happening because nobody's making comments or calling. And then it gets very boring. And then
That guy's name, they just popped in my head, Mike McCann at WST.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Had
that deep kind of,
I've always wondered what happened to him.
I don't know. He was big buddies with Cullen Bissett at the State Theater. They both drank like fish.
I always thought the loss of WAST was, in fact, exactly that, a loss. It was a community resource, but
Yeah, everybody, a lot of people I knew in Peaburg and in Easton listened to WST, particularly the call-in shows, you know.
they decided to take the path of least resistance, and then no one listened. I think they eventually got bought out, I think, by Clear Channel. I have no idea what, if anything, is on the AM. The FM is just country now. I mean, they're not in Easton anymore. I think they're actually in Allentown, if I'm not mistaken. All right, there's all our pages. Here comes our groups. That one. That one. Hurry up. Sorry, Franz, we've had our first in-studio guest. Somebody beat you to
No problem.
it. You weren't looking for that one to be high on the CV then, I'm guessing. No. That's that one. All right. I can sneak in one more. Can't tell you. It's just 54 and 104-year-old line. Oh, right under the wire. He knows what he's doing. We're going to be live in 3, 2.
Kennedy, 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 Kennedy. Do you want a man for president who's seasoned through and through, but not so doggone seasoned that he won't try something new? A man who's old enough to know
and young enough to do.
Well, it's up to you, it's up to you. It's strictly up to you. But it's Kennedy, 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 Kennedy for me. Kennedy,
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 Kennedy.
Do you want a man with spirit who is not afraid to fight?
A man whose record shows that he will fight for what is right.
A loyal man who brings a job a fresh new point of view. Well, it's up to you, it's up to you. It's strictly up to you. 'Cause it's Kennedy, 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 Kennedy for me.
Kennedy, 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 Kennedy.
And do you deny to any man the right he's guaranteed to be elected president, no matter what his creed?
It's promised in the Bill of Rights to which we must be true.
So it's up to you, it's up to you. It's strictly up to you. And it's Kennedy, 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 Kennedy for me.
Kennedy, Kennedy,
Kennedy,
Kennedy.
Do you like a man who answers straight, a man who's always fair?
We'll measure him against the others, and when you compare, you cast your vote for Kennedy and a change that's overdue. So it's up to you, it's up to you, it's strictly up to you. Yes, it's Kennedy, 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 Kennedy for me. Kennedy, 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 Kennedy.
Welcome from my humble second bedroom here in the Saucon Valley, part of the Lehigh Valley in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, part of these United States, Western Hemisphere, North American continent, on this planet Earth, the only one we have. Third rock from the sun in the Terran solar system, part of the Milky Way galaxy. This is the Kennedy Effect, live with you for the 12th of March, 2023. I remember speaking to you last week about, wow, it's March already, spring's on the way. Not if you were able to look outside here in the Lehigh Valley. It looks like the middle of December. Gray, overcast, chilly. We are expecting quite a bit of precipitation within the next, 24 hours or so. Very gray, miserable day. Just what, kind of just what March is, I guess. Transformation between winter and spring, but we are very, very happy to be with you here for the 12th of March. We're already halfway basically through the month of March. How fast did that go? We have changed clocks. If there, by some weird stretch of the imagination, you don't know why you're watching us because you think it's 4 p.m. It is not. It is 5 p.m. daylight savings time here in the United States. And for all the other nations around Earth who still do daylight savings time, I know that that's becoming a thing. I have a vague feeling that this will be the last time that we change clocks here in this country. There seems to be growing momentum almost every time that we do change clocks so that we won't do it again. And this guy wouldn't mind having another hour of sleep back, I can tell you that. But that said, thank you all for being there. Let's get to the business end of the program. It is 12:05 Eastern Time. And again, this is the Kennedy Effect live for the 12th of March, 2023, wherever you might be across the Facebook universe. And I myself alone have shared the program to, I think it was 101 different places this week. We thank you. In a social media world, if no one sees you, no one hears you. So for every place that allows us to take a little tiny piece of your Facebook universe We thank you, and we thank you very, very much. It is how, in this sort of in this environment, it's how we survive. So thank you very much for allowing us to be part of it. You can stay right where you are. Keep watching, keep listening, and I will do my best to keep up with your comments, your questions, and so on. Whatever group, whatever page, wherever it might be that you're watching. But if you really want me to see it very, very quickly, please come over to our home group Facebook page. That other side of information. That other side of information is our home group page. It is a home group page for all things surrounding the program. I will see you right away. We'll say hello. I'll take your comments. I'll take your questions live throughout the duration of the program and through the midst of our conversations. Hot101.net, our name is our web address. There is no device that is connected to the internet where you cannot listen to us. And if you're not, why aren't you? You should be by now. Hot101.net, our name is our web address. You can listen on desktops, laptops, tablets, phones. You can Bluetooth into your car, to your headphones, your earbuds, speakers, anything like that. And of course, you can tell Alexa to play hot101.net. But you don't need to use the website either. You can use our apps. 3 easy app ways to get a hold of us. If you have an Apple device, go to the Apple App Store, Google Play Store for Android devices, and the TuneIn radio app. Go up to the search bar, type in hot101.net for any other type of device. And of course, TuneIn works on Apple and Android as well, but it seems to work on every type of device. Go to the TuneIn radio app, search bar, hot101.net. You'll find us there. And if you're not listening, you should be. And of course, the TCP Media Group, right out of Lancaster, PA. Let me get to a very important news item. We are entering St. Patrick's Week. Started celebrating last Friday. We'll continue to probably celebrate into next Sunday. I do not yet know if we are going to be with you next week. Kristen and I have been very, very blessed to have been invited to a St. Patrick's event next Saturday. Sunday. Let me try that again. Next Sunday, I expect that we will be attending. So I don't know if we will be live with you here next week, but just keep tuned to, keep your eye on Facebook, and we'll let you know how that's going. So why is he wearing a Celtic football shirt? My God, you're a Manchester United supporter. You're damn straight I am. But hey, it's St. Patrick's Week. We can break out a little bit of the green, can't we? And celebrate a little bit. I do have an Irish national football team jersey, but I wore it Friday and didn't get a chance to wash it. And it is quite in need of said. So I did not wear it here today and did not scare my guest out of the studio. But happy St. Patrick's Day week to you. There is no other ethnicity in the United States that more people identify with, which is probably not the smoothest way for me to have said that, than the Irish. There are upwards of 40 million Americans, and I think that might even be a bit low in the scale, that identify as Irish to some extent, or at least to some extent, purely, if not partially. And I think the partial might push that number up into the 70 millions. More Americans identify as Irish to some extent, just a sheer number, more of them than there are actual Irish citizens on the Isle itself, which is interesting, isn't it? So happy St. Patrick's Week. However you should decide to celebrate, I beg you to please do it safely and to use your head, use your common sense. If you're going to have a pint, don't drive, or take an awful long time before you do. Fill your belly with fish and chips and soda bread and whatever else, corned beef and cabbage, whatever else you choose to do, but don't drink and drive. It is sheer lunacy. It's insanity. It is unnecessary. We're smarter than this. Drinking and driving is not just about you, but it's about everybody else around you on the road and everyone else that you can hurt, damage, and so on along the way. Have a pint, celebrate, have a good time, gather with friends and family, go out, frequent your favorite pub, and have a good time, but do it with some brains involved. So there's that bit. I also wanted to get to something that I think has been brewing throughout the week and that I think has been somewhat misreported. You will know if you are a frequent or even an infrequent listener, viewer of the program, that I try to take the issues that are facing our country, and even though we do look at them through a very, very partisan lens, because I don't make any, I sure as hell won't apologize for my partisan tilt, nor do I think I have to justify it or apologize for it for that matter, and won't. We'll do neither. But clearly I'm a partisan, and I intend to stay that way as long as the country is on the brink of fascism. Yes, you're damn straight. I'm going to stay that way. That said, the Fox so-called news Dominion voting machine case has really bubbled in the last couple of weeks. And it continued to do so this week as Dominion released even more emails, texts, etc., that it has gathered through the discovery process that show what so many of us have already known, and what former Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd warned the world was an intentional destruction of democratic, small d, democratic governments around the planet. An intentional destruction of democracy around the planet for the sake of power and money. And this is what I've been telling you here for weeks and months and years. We can all be upset about voter intimidation. We can be upset about the way our society, society, communities are being split and segmented and cut and sectioned into such small pieces and turned against each other. We can be upset about massive tax cuts for corporations. We can be upset about overspending on defense and so on and so on and so on, and all these different things. But we must wake to the realization of why these things are really happening. What the real bottom line of all of it is. The last argument that you can get to that there is no argument past. And it is my belief, and has been and will be going forward, that that argument is this. It's all about money. The billionaire class, and Senator Sanders has said almost as much. He's not quite gotten to where I've gotten, which is not to say that I'm any smarter or better than Senator Sanders, just to say that we share a similar philosophy. He's said similar, but not quite gone as far. The billionaire class in this country and on this planet have made a conscious decision that my life, your life, that borders, ethnicities, skin colors, genders, democracy itself no longer matter to them. In fact, that democracy itself is no longer convenient. That a progressive awakening, very similar to that which happened after the Civil War, at the founding of the country, during the Republican Great Depression, a progressive awakening is happening. One need only look further than the record numbers of first-time voters that came out in 2022. Kids, if you will, if you don't mind me calling you that, kids, who've never lived in a nation that did not know Ronald Reagan and the effects of Reagan, have made a conscious decision that something's wrong in this country and that we can do better. They are correct. But when we talk about, so what does this have to do with the Fox and Dominion case? Fox has had to admit in open court as part of its defense against the Dominion lawsuit in an effort to save itself over $1.5 billion that they lie, that their business model is to lie because they're just entertainment. It's not news. I would argue it's not entertainment. But in their open court defense to try to save themselves this pretty onerous financial penalty that seems to be coming their way, they've had to defend themselves. How have they chosen to defend themselves? They had to define who they are. And how did they decide to define who they are? They told you what you should have already known, and what the millions of people around this country who have listened to them as if it were truth now must heed. They now must take to heart. The truth has now been given to you, is that Fox itself knows they're full of it. They know themselves that they are full of it. And why have they done this for decades? Because it's good for one particular billionaire. Because he doesn't like to pay taxes. He wants all the money for himself. And the rest of us who can't afford healthcare, can't afford education, can't make more than a minimum wage, can't unionize. To hell with the rest of us. Die early. Not generating wealth for a billionaire? Die early. They've had to say it now in open court. It's what so many of us have always known. But now the rest of you who watch it religiously, I don't use that term lightly, who watch it religiously, now have to come to the realization that you've been and are being lied to straight to your face. You are being treated as if you are fools. You've been taken for fools. You're continuing to be taken for fools. I don't think you are fools. They're telling you flat out that you've been lied to. So wake up and don't be lied to anymore. It's a very simple choice to make. Decide that you're not going to be a fool anymore. It's really quite simple. If your child came home and lied straight to your face, you wouldn't accept it. If your spouse did it, if your boss did it, if you were in a fender bender at a stoplight and the person who hit you lied straight to your face and said, "That's not even my car," you'd know better. But when Tucker Carlson and Hannity and Ingraham and all the rest of them tell you that an election was stolen, tell you that brown people are coming here to take everything you have, coming here to tell you that, coming on air to tell you that trans people and gay people hate you and they're coming to kill you and groom your children. They've now told you in court that they're lying to you, and that they know they're lying to you, and that they're doing it for the sake of power and profit. Nothing more. We're better than this. I'd like to still hold out some hope that we are better than this, that our country is better than this. There will be no return to normalcy, quote unquote normalcy, in this country. The country that some of us remember, and remember fondly despite its shortfalls. The nation of the post-war, post-Republican Great Depression America, which had its large faults, I'm not here to tell you it was perfect, but it was a hell of a lot more equal than it is now, economically. Perhaps not socially, but economically. And with social equality comes economic equality. With economic equality comes social equality. They are inexorably linked. But we don't get back to that until enough of us wake up to the fact that we've been lied to, that we are on a constant basis by anything that has the word Fox and news involved in it, being lied to for the sake of power and profit. And it's nothing more difficult than that to grasp. So I am not here to play Catholic nun and rock you over the knuckles and say, wake up, America, because I actually think the majority of you know that that is exactly what's happening. You now have to make the conscious decision to turn the channel and to not buy from the advertisers that advertise there. It's time to make the economic impact, or make an economic cost, really, I should say, on the advertisers of Fox very, very well known. It's time to make it hurt. You can vote with your wallet. I know that there are Republicans and self-identified Republicans. Real Republicans don't exist anymore. And self-identified conservatives, and there's very few of them anymore either, that do listen to this. Not in the same numbers as the progressives and the Democrats, and I get it. But you're there. So I'm asking you to wake up. Because your own quote-unquote news network has now told you in open court, we're lying to people for entertainment and for profit. So be better. You don't have to watch it. You don't have to be lied to, and you don't have to patronize the sponsors that advertise there. You wouldn't want to be lied to by the people around you. Why would you be lied to by a face on a TV? Mega multimillionaires, by the way. So that is my opening rant for tonight. I had to get that out of the way, because I find it interesting as the program lives on in a recorded version after we say goodnight to you from a live point of view. The comments that continue to come in and will say, well, things that I won't repeat. I don't make millions and millions of dollars in profit by lying to you. Truth is exactly that. It's truth. The earth is round. Gravity is a real thing. Sky is blue, grass is green. And Fox is lying to your face. Truth is truth. Sometimes it's really hard to take. It's unpleasant, it's uncomfortable. Makes us angry because we don't want to consider the fact that we've allowed ourselves to be lied to for such a long time. Hell, when Fox was first created, I watched it. I actually thought it was quite fair and balanced, to be honest with you. But it quickly turned. And they did so for power and for profit, and to kind of in a very it's 1920s Italian, 1930s German sort of way, soften you up to the fact that it's okay if there's 5 or 10 billionaires in the country. That's good for you. Of course, we know better than that, but you were conditioned to believe that it was good for you. It isn't. We were lied to then. We're being lied to now. And Murdoch has done this on 3 continents now. He did this on Australia, turned a progressive, small d, very committed small d social democratic nation into at least a 50-50 country. They seem to vacillate back and forth between conservatives and labor down there. He's done it lock, stock, and barrel to the UK. The Conservative Party in the UK this week announced internationally illegal laws to crack down on asylum seekers to the UK. Sound familiar? Because they have nothing to run on. Elections are scheduled for next year in the UK. Not even in 2023, but in 24. The earliest I can recall in a parliamentary system that elections have been called. But because they have no record to run on, will scare especially the older white British public with the specter of asylum seekers coming to get them. Does that sound familiar to you? Because we do it here in this country. Brown people are coming to get you. Black people are coming to get you. Trans people are coming to get your children. Because there's no record to run on. Conservatives can't stand in front of the British public and tell people exactly what they stand for. Tax cuts for rich people, corporations, and the privatization of the health service. Republicans can't tell you what they stand for. The end of Social Security, the end of Medicare, the end of the Department of Education, the Department of Energy, the Department of Labor, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Election Commission. In fact, pretty much the end of government as we know it, except for the Department of Defense. And no taxes for rich people, just for the bottom 99%. You get to pay for all of it. No one would ever get elected that way. So they don't tell you. Instead, they tell you, brown people are coming for you. Trans people are coming for you. When nothing of the sort is true. We're better than this. We're smarter than this. Fox itself has told you. We're lying to you. You can't court of justice, you can't judge $1.5 billion judgment against us because we were lying. We never really meant anything of what we said. We lie for a living. They said it in court. They testified to it. It's in the documents. When the actual testimony begins, and boy, I can't wait for that. I hope there's cameras in the courtroom for that. And when Rupert Murdoch has to take the stand and say out loud, we lie for a living. When Tucker Carlson has to sit in court, place his hand on a Bible, swear to tell the truth under the penalty of perjury, and say, I lie for a living. Is that what it's going to take for the rest of you to wake up? Because it's coming. And they've already said it in deposition. We're better than this. We are better than this. We can get back to a time where we debate each other on issues and points of view. We can. We can. We can have legitimate disagreement and legitimate policy debate again in this country, but not until we come to the realization that this entire media machine that has been built on the right is lying to you for no other reason than to make money and to keep money in the hands of the 700 or so billionaires that are in this country. $5:30 Eastern Time, Daylight Savings Time. The Kennedy Effect is live with you for the 12th of March, 2023, wherever you might be across Facebook. Thank you so much. If you're watching on Facebook, I ask you and will continue to ask you, maybe even beg you, please share the program everywhere that you think it is appropriate to, pages, groups, individuals, and even some places where you might think it's not appropriate. I shared some stuff into some Republican groups this week. I'm very shocked no one said anything back. Maybe it's finally getting through. In fact, it was one of the articles out of The Guardian where Tucker Carlson himself was texting back and forth with one of the other hosts about how much he just absolutely hates Trump to the core. That came out. So I texted that article, or sorry, no, I posted that article into a Republican group that I actually happen to be in. I believe they haven't kicked me out of that yet. Kudos to them, by the way, for not kicking me out yet, but maybe they will after this week. So wherever you are on Facebook, stay there, enjoy. We appreciate it. Stay there and watch in the group that you're watching. That's awesome. I will do my best to keep track of your comments and questions, no matter what group they come from. But you are also welcome to come to our home group Facebook page, That Other Side of Information. I will see you right away. I want to take your comments and questions. I want to interact with you live in real time. Hot101.net. Our name is our web address. Listen on any type of internet connected device, desktop, laptop, tablet, phone, Bluetooth speaker, Bluetooth headphones, Bluetooth it in the car, on the car speakers. And of course, you can tell Alexa to play Hot101.net, Apple App Store, Google Play Store, and the TuneIn Radio app, and of course, the TCP Media Group. Let me get to my guest who has been waiting patiently and somehow has not fallen asleep through my opening rant. A historical moment, I would say, for the program, in no small measure, really. If you don't do what I do, you might consider it not to be a big deal. It's kind of a big deal for me, though. This is our first in-studio guest. I kind of think that's cool. When we reconfigured this second bedroom, and it is literally a second bedroom, which John will be able to attest to, this is what we had in mind, that we could be able to welcome people into my home, bring them upstairs, and that they would be able to join the program sitting across the table from me. So you're going to see on video a lot of weird things. I do my best to stare into the camera and look you in the eyes, so to speak. Probably going to be looking over my right shoulder here out of habit an awful lot today, but so it's kind of a historical day for the program. Our first in-studio guest. Our in-studio guest is my friend and my neighbor, because I think might have even walked over here today. He only lives but across the street. And a gentleman who has been an attorney and a veteran of the wars of democratic politics for going on 40 years now. And he's also starting his own podcast to talk about these stories and more. And one of the things that he's told me that he wants to do with the podcast that I think is really important is how his stories, his experiences within the law affect you, how making the law understandable, because it is sort of a different language, isn't it? A very different language, and how his experiences and stories will, bring the law home to you, help you understand how the law works, how to navigate your way around the law, and so on. So our guest is Mr. John Vivian. John, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks for waiting through my opening rant. I had to get through that. Some of the stuff that's come out this week has just been, I would say it would be shocking if it wasn't so true. Hasn't shocked most of us, but it's nice to finally hear the people involved admit what is the actual truth. As with any new guest to the program, John, the opening question is, who is John Vivian and how did you get here?
Pretty simple. I'm a trial attorney. I've practiced law in Lehigh Valley for 43 years. I've tried basically over 300 some cases easily. And we have mutual contacts among the Sonkin Democrats. I let people know up front, I was not bored by your rant. In fact, I read the original Dominion lawsuit. You can get it on the Time site, the Post. Marvelous, probably the most amazing complaint I've ever read in the defamation field. Well over 280 pages, and it's one of two lawsuits. There's another lawsuit out there involving a UK company who only participated in the election in Los Angeles County. Again, another masterful complaint. I've known for years, I'm obviously not a Fox News fan of any sort. In fact, one of the funnier things I remember seeing was CeeLo Green, who sang a certain song where we can't use that word on the radio. He was on Colbert, and Colbert had him sing that song and plug in Fox News instead of the other curse word. I think I laughed for about an hour when I heard that. Yeah, I tried cases where we're going to attempt to do with the podcast. The first segment will involve an actual case, which was a gang rape of a woman on a college campus. We don't use the names. We actually filed it anonymously in court. We were forced to drop that suit because of a case that the Supreme Court came down with, which needs to be remedied legislatively. Essentially, what they said is there's a contract case called Gummings. There's a contract between the students and the school, and therefore, any Title IX civil-based right action, you cannot get emotional damages in a contract case. Now, as many of you know who have students and children who are students, one does not sign a contract with the school. They made an implied contract, and it's dangerous, as are many of their decisions. If you carry that out, is there not an implied contract between the police and the community? Therefore, you're not going to be able to get emotional damage in those cases. These laws affect people who are already severely damaged. Look, the damage in a rape case, and I've done a number of them, are emotional. Some women never get over it. And not to be snide, but it's about money. It's about protecting the school. It's about protecting the insurance company. And therefore, you don't have any damages. So you have an act called Cleary, and we'll talk about that. You have a question, I see.
Well, there's nothing snide about the truth. Is there? I mean, this is the final step of the argument that I try to make here every week. Not because I'm smarter or better than anybody else, and I welcome anybody to disagree with what I think is my ultimate bottom line for all of these arguments. Why destroy public education? Because who benefits from the absolute destruction, degradation, the pulling apart at every thread of public education? Private education. What is private education? For profit. Who benefits from keeping a 14-year-old black kid in prison until he's 70 because he had 1/8 of an ounce of marijuana in his pocket? The private company that administers the prison. Who benefits from the US having troops in 184 countries? The modern empire. What Eisenhower warned us about, the military-industrial complex. Who benefits from the fact that troops don't do half of the things they used to do? They don't set up their own encampments. They don't cook their own food. They don't wash their own clothes.
You're going to go to hell?
The military-industrial complex. It seems to me that the ultimate end argument of all of these things, the regulatory protections between investment banks and commercial banks and insurance companies being completely eroded, the regulatory destruction during the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which I talk about here an awful lot, that a damned Democratic president was stupid enough to sign, eliminating the controls over how many television and newspapers can be owned by one person in a given market, which has led to this mass right-wing media machine, which just admitted again this week, as I took the first half hour of the program to talk about, lies to you on a consistent basis. It's all at the end of the day about the money, period. And in a capitalistic system, the chase of money, there's nothing wrong with the chase of money or the chase of profit. If you as an individual open up a small law practice, you want to make a living. If you open up a bakery, You want to make a living. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But to break the law to do it, to manipulate the law to do it, to boldface ignore the law to do it, or to take that final step to buy the law to do it, is when democracy ceases and fascism begins. And that seems to me to be the ultimate end of all of these arguments. At the end of the day, it's money and power. The billionaire class has decided, they've made a conscious decision, an open, conscious decision. In fact, they're telling it to you now. Musk is now saying the quiet part out loud. Billionaires no longer need or want democracy. It's not convenient to the complete unabated hoarding of wealth.
Well,
Period.
Yeah.
That's the end of it. And the cases that you've told me about just in our conversations this week, I think I can, no pun intended, I can make a case. See what he did there? See that, gang? I can make a case, still ultimately come down to that. Protect the insurance company. Collect the premiums, but never pay them out. That's how we make a profit.
Of course.
To hell with the young girl that
claims.
was raped. She's only one young girl. Screw her.
Well, you have to look at the overall. What we're going to do on the podcast is take a look at that case in the first episode and talk about how it affects society overall. You have 82 institutions of higher learning in Pennsylvania that must report under what is known as the Clery Act. For those listeners who don't know what that is, it grew out of a young woman who was raped and mutilated on the Lehigh campus here. Her parents are from the main line, and now schools have to keep violent crime statistics on campus. And one would argue they're underreported because if the violent crime occurs 10 feet off the campus boundary line, it doesn't get reported. Of those violent crimes, many of them are unfortunately sexual assaults, serious assaults. So now we have a system where 82 institutions report. And by the way, they don't have to give those to you as parents or as students. You have to ask for them. They should be, we've said, legislatively, it should be decreed they have to be in the packet. People think that their kids are safer on local campuses. I can tell you should look up some of the statistics. The rape per 1,000 statistics at a place like Temple are 0.01, 2.4 at Moravian. The highest in the state is Gettysburg College at 3.8. Boggles your mind when you look at it. And the bottom line becomes that, it's not only this girl. How many more girls are going to suffer this? How many more women? How many more men? How many more people of different genders?
And we already know that the percentage of women who actually report their assaults is very low.
Sure.
It's painfully low. So if the 0.01 to the 2.4 to the 3.8 that you just reported might be what statistics tell us what might be at a max. If I'm working from memory, please correct me. I think it's only about a third of women actually report. I think it might even be less than that.
Between a third and 40% on some of the figures. It depends what you look at.
So that 3.8 could actually be for 14%.
Yeah, I have a client in one of these cases who has agreed to be on the first podcast. I'm hoping she does. It takes a great deal of courage to talk about what she went through.
I should say, yeah.
And if you look at how her case was handled, it's no wonder that women don't report it. They never ran her blood. She told them she may have been drugged. If you're fortunate, someone reports it within a 12 to 24-hour period. After that, you cannot detect rape drugs, ketamine, roofie, etc. The officer in this case determined he didn't need to do that.
Campus officer or municipal?
Municipal police. There's a thing called a SANE exam that women go through after a rape. For those of you who are not familiar with it, And I never knew until I got involved in that case that whether or not the blood is drawn is solely up to the investigating officer. Shouldn't be. Should be drawn in every case. Um, Immunity laws, we're going to talk a great deal about. You talked about the prison system. I've had and represented 4 hanging death cases in the local prisons here in Lehigh Valley in the last 5 years. I have another one that's going to be filed. The prisons don't handle, Jeff, their own medicine anymore. There's an outfit that provides most of that care, and it is for profit. It's always for profit.
Let me see if I can take a higher view of what it is that we're talking about. As destructive and detrimental as it is what we're talking about. What has this done to college campuses? I know that when Kristen and I visit, she attended Lehigh. And when we visit Lehigh, or when I visit Moravian, where I attended, especially earlier on in our relationship, when she would like to, let me show you where I went to school, and let me show you where I went to school. And we would wander around campus, and we realized that the campus is not the open public place it used to be. I remember seniors coming in to the library at Moravian and sitting and reading books and reading magazines. I remember remarkably, the cafe at the student center at Moravian is still open to the public as a regular functioning cafe, coffee shop, restaurant. Kristen wanted to take me to the coffee shop at Lehigh, and it was blocked. You need key access now to get in, card key, of course, but you need student key access or administrator. You need authorized, Lehigh issued ID access to get in now. These campuses seem to no longer be public, even though they continue to expand, especially Lafayette and Easton and Lehigh here in the Lehigh Valley, taking buying up blocks of residential homes, flattening them and expanding. Often, if not always, in conjunction with the cooperation of the local government, because expanding universities are good for local municipalities. Generally speaking, they're good for the tax base. But that said, how have these things changed? I know this isn't the focus of what you do. I'm asking you from your years and years and years of experience, as well as your political experience. How has this changed the relationship between municipalities, perhaps even states, and the public writ large, not just the students, but the public?
Well, the example I tend to use is Temple. When I went to law school at Temple a long time ago, there were no resident students on campus, essentially. There are now 35 to 40,000 students in residential housing. And that has occurred since I left law school in 1981. These security concerns have to be paramount. We live in a very different world. There is civil liability for failures on security ever since the Connie Francis case way back when against Holiday Inn. What it means is that that free exchange, that sitting in the quad like I did in my university down in the South early on, those days may be going by. And it's endemic, is it not, against society? I had somebody say, and again, excuse my facetiousness, but there were a number of Sunken Valley mothers, and they and her husbands and I, we used to have this dinner called First Friday. And I remember one of the fathers saying, our kids don't make any independent judgments and, that sort of thing. And I said, well, just when do you expect that to happen? I mean, when I was a kid, we played pickup baseball. Mom told you when to come home. Today, everything is supervised, chaperoned. It's the world we live in. That being said, there are things you can do, but one wonders if the socialization program of 2 kids tussling on a playground hasn't been replaced with a war of words on Facebook. I don't know. I can't answer those questions. I'm old enough. I probably won't have to struggle with it, Jeff.
Yeah, I almost hope so. How badly? I remember when we had a chance to speak earlier in the week that we could do, you kind of laughed and said that we could probably talk all week about this. Like continuously without taking a break. How desperate has the public's lack of confidence in the judiciary, in the legal system, how have you seen that manifest itself over the last, well, I shouldn't say even over the last years in your career, let's put it that way. It seems to me that folks' faith in the judicial process, in the legal process, is perhaps all but gone, as well as a firm understanding, because we have all too much evidence of it, that there's not one legal system, but several, depending on skin color, wealth, income, political power, et cetera, et cetera. How have you seen that manifest itself in your career?
I would say it's changed significantly since I started practicing law. I would say to you that I don't think there are different legal systems for people of color or wealth. The problem is that your legal representation within that system depends to some extent what you can afford and not afford. Our Constitution guarantees, for instance, criminally accused, an area I don't participate in by choice, a right to representation under the United States Constitution as well as Pennsylvania Constitution. Now, would anybody argue that if Clarence Darrow were alive today, you'd be better served having Clarence Darrow represent you? F. Lee Bailey, etc.? No. But you do get representation. Now, part of the problem with the confidence in the judiciary is when we see, and people don't understand the legality of it, but we see opinions being handed down by the highest court in the land. Dobbs reversing decades of a woman's right to choose, to have self-bodily autonomy on very specious grounds. And as a lawyer, I've read it a number of times and what I call bad legal reasoning. Citizens United, corporations are people. When you go on your rant about money, think about that one. Corporations are not people when the law suits it. They are, however, people when it comes to being able to spend unlimited funds and black money to influence who represents us all. Those type of opinions, I lost my first confidence in the United States Supreme Court. And they decided Bush v. Gore. I'm of the opinion, and I'm certainly not a common law professor, but I know a bit about constitutional law, that there was no jurisdiction in the Supreme Court because the last and final word on any election is that of the state court, absent fraud. There was no fraud issue in Bush v. Gore, if you recall. It was about how to count hanging chads. And the Supreme Court of Florida said that Al Gore won. But nobody raised that issue, to my knowledge, and that's a shame. It was a political vote right down the line, 5 Republicans, 4 Democrat appointees.
In fact, I believe one of the arguments that was made in front of the Supreme Court is that denying George W. Bush the presidency would do him irreparable harm, and that the Republicans on the court took that into account.
Well, yeah, it's what we would call an opinion dicta. In other words, shouldn't be writing about it. To me, it's a ridiculous argument. It maybe did irreparable harm to Al Gore too, and I'm of the opinion
which is the interesting part.
Yeah,
we seem to ignore that part of it. Yeah, we were all concerned about the harm it might do George W. Bush, but not the nation or Al Gore.
Well, I look back on it and I point out to some of my friends who are on the other side of the aisle politically from me that this crazy guy Al Gore wanted to invest the surplus we had, if you'll recall, when Clinton left office, in a green bubble, in environmental things. And they started talking on the other side about the snowy owl and all this other nonsense. Where would we be today if we'd invested in that green bubble we're trying to get into now?
Oh, we
Um,
had a discussion on the program a few weeks ago about what would have happened if Teddy Kennedy had won the election in 1980.
mhm.
So, I mean, the what ifs of American history are probably worthy of a podcast all on their own. In fact, I know that there are several that do exactly that, alternate histories and what ifs and so on. American popular opinion of and about the Supreme Court, I believe the only governmental body that has a lower approval rating than the Supreme Court right now is Congress, which usually hovers in the 12% range. I believe the Supreme Court is somewhere in the 18 to 22% range. Where did it go wrong? Where did the Supreme Court go wrong? Was it Lewis Powell or was it after?
In my humble opinion, it started with Ronald Reagan packing the court. And it became about
How does it not go
one
back to
major issue, abortion.
how does it not go back to the Powell memo?
To some extent, yes. To some extent, no. My belief is that we've packed an entire court based upon one issue, which is, by the way, a minority view in America, and that is the right to life stance. And it didn't matter who the person was, what their qualifications were. We have a deeper problem. Every lawyer in every state, every judge in every state is bound by an ethics code, but not the highest court in the land.
In fact, they're
Thomas-
actively fighting the imposition of the same ethics code that I almost said controls. That's not the word I meant, but the same ethics guidelines that govern the remainder of the federal courts, district courts and appeals courts. The Supreme Court is actively working to not have those be put upon them. And this is where Congress, by the way, of either party, of course, Republicans don't want ethics on the Supreme Court because it's all their folks that are there right now, 6-3. But this is where the Democratic Congress failed enormously. In the 74 days that President Obama had of a Democratic majority in the 2 years previous, first 2 years of President Biden. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's Article 3, Section 2 that Congress shall regulate the courts. Congress shall have the power to regulate the courts. It's a mere legislative action that would impose the same regulatory guidelines that you're talking about over the Supreme Court.
There is a question whether or not they can do that.
It's right in the Constitution that Congress shall.
Yeah, the interpretation on that varies. They have the rights to appoint, they have the right to advise and consent. Whether or not they can set out an ethics code that binds the Supreme Court, who is a separate branch of government, remains to be determined. That being said, I would do it.
The judiciary is a separate branch of government, and yet they put an ethics code on the district and appeals courts levels.
That
Wow.
ethics code comes from the Supreme Court and from the lawyers as general. Our legislature, for instance, in Pennsylvania, our ethics code, our disciplinary code comes from our Supreme Court. Lawyers are disciplined by lawyers. The only thing approaching an ethics code, they essentially with workman compensation judges in Pennsylvania, the legislature has taken with regard to their appointed judges, they've taken that ethics judicial conduct code and put it in the work comp statute. They don't determine the ethics code overall with regard to attorneys. Most laymen don't know that. So
When the number of members of the Supreme Court has changed through the history of the country, I think 9 times, ironically, it's Congress that did it.
that's different. They can expand a number of judges. They can do those sorts of things. The
Is that
question
power
is,
not given to them by Article 3, Section 2?
I would argue that it is. I'm telling you that there's an opposing view,
And my questions
which
are
may
not,
be valid.
and my questions are not to stimulate an argument, but
Oh,
a
I get it.
debate.
Yeah.
That's how we learn. That's how everybody learns, not just me, but all of us. We learn from debate, we grow from it. But I would submit that, and I don't, I am not a constitutional scholar in any way, shape, or form, and I don't play one on the radio. But it would seem to me very clear cut, especially for the folks on the right, which I find is extremely ironic. The folks on the right who would wrap themselves in the Constitution whenever it's convenient for them, and then would absolutely ignore it.
Well,
I had lots of other words that were flowing through my brain there, right there for a second, but I chose to keep it G-rated. That would ignore it when convenient. And that ignoring it seems to be much more of the time than it is not at this point.
well, you have ethics.
To me,
codes,
Article
Jeff.
3, Section 2 gives Congress the right. In fact, I've advocated on this program that Congress should be establishing new district courts. In fact, I would probably double the number of district courts. We haven't added a new district court in this country since, I think, the late 1800s, if I'm not mistaken, and I might be wrong about that, but I think it's the late 1800s. There's still only 9 districts. There should probably be double that number. I'd like to see the Supreme Court expanded to 15 justices, not 11 or even 13, but 15.
That they can do safely. The question with an ethics code is whether or not you can instill in them how they're going to run their courts, because that's considered part and parcel of it. I need to correct you on only one thing in it. There are circuits. There are lots of districts. We have 3 districts in Pennsylvania alone. New Jersey is 1 district. That being said, I would agree with you. New Jersey should have 2. We should probably have 4 or 5. The solution is not to create more districts.
My
The solution their solution.
Right.
Their solution is put more judges in the district you already have and are overburdened.
So I
That
use the
always
wrong
happens.
terminology. It's the number of circuits.
No, I
that
just wanted
need
to correct
be-
it for the viewers. It's circuits.
It's the circuits that need to be increased.
I think there are 10 of them last time I checked. But in any event, here's what's more important. Putting the ethics code in isn't the end all and be on. We have ethics codes in Congress. You tell me why Matt Gaetz, Jim Jordan, anybody who participated in a rebellion in this country on January 6th is still sitting in Congress.
The one that the 14th Amendment specifically says they're no longer fit to, Scott Perry, no longer fit to, or legally, constitutionally should even be sitting in office.
Right.
This is what, when I asked you earlier about the different levels of justice or the different, how many different justice systems do we have? That is one to me that seems to be very blatant. And, you said you don't think there are different justice systems. I would very respectfully disagree. I think there are. When you have, we've seen it we just saw it this week here inside the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I'm very blessed that if you watch or listen to the program on a regular basis, you know that I live here in the Commonwealth, and yet at the same time, I tend to lament the fact that the program is a little too Pennsylvania based. That said, for the sake of example, we had another state representative resign this week because he had sexual assault charges against him. We have seen all too often when some and not all, by the way, of these sitting office holders will have charges against them, some of them exceptionally serious, be they of a sexual nature, campaign finance law, voter intimidation, sometimes as much as bribery. They resign and it all goes away. That's a level of a justice system to me that doesn't function. Because if I embezzled from my company and I'll just resign and I won't work here anymore, it doesn't go away. I get chased. I'll be in jail. But it seems that kind of stuff goes away. The same way.
Not in all of them, Jeff. What happens is they don't report it anymore because now he's not a representative, a congressman, a senator. In many of those cases, if you check it out, a lawsuit goes on civilly that's brought and has to be determined. Now, the problem I have is that, and I'm going to paint with a wide brush, and I'm not saying in every case, I'm going to say that when Democrats are accused of that kind of scurrilous conduct, i.e. Al Franken,
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
I was going to say it.
Right. He gets the crucifixion treatment.
Somewhat
Matt Gaetz is still in Congress. Okay. I mean,
And
there's
Jim
different
Jordan.
pairs.
somewhat self-imposed, by the way. It was, I still remember Al Franken going to the floor of the Senate and saying, investigate me. I'm begging you.
Well,
Take me to the ethics committee.
He's a decent
I
human
want a
being.
hearing. I want you to vet this out. This needs to be heard.
Right.
The woman in that photo needs to be, she needs to be heard. Her words are important. If I did something that I don't deserve to be standing here in this chamber anymore, then by God, remove me. And he asked for that investigation. But then again, it was politically expedient for Kristen Gillibrand, so she drummed him out. And her career suffered for it. And I'm not necessarily upset about that. But
Well, the fact is that Al Franken, smart. I don't know if you've done any of his readings. I'm always amused.
I'm a terrible reader.
He wrote a paperback named Rush Limbaugh's a Big Fat Liar,
Yeah.
Which was hysterical.
And
the
turned
thing
out to be exactly correct.
Yeah, he did. And what is interesting about it is he had a great research staff, and all of it was documented, even though it was a comedy-based kind of attack. When you look at the misconduct that goes away and gets swept under the table, it all comes down, unfortunately, to political expedience. And we need, as a society as a whole and as individuals, to voice our displeasure, not only in the voting booth, but to our elected representatives. And most of us don't. I mean, when's the last time any of you wrote out there a letter to your congressperson? One of the things I hope to do is I'm very hopeful I'll be able to get a number of our federal representatives to come on the podcast. I tried cases with and against Susan Wild for years before she went to Congress. She's deeply concerned about some of these issues. I know she's concerned about what's happening in the case I talked about. It's going to be the first podcast episode involving a gang rape of a student. We all should be concerned about that. The problem I see is that we sometimes, in talking about the law, in trying a case, a judge ruling on a case, sometimes we forget this affects a human being, okay? This affects someone who's hurting. This affects someone whose only redress is this legal system we talk about. And the legal system functions properly if the people in it function properly. I believe that. Now, I'm going to say what you said earlier along that vein. I don't believe our civil system is perfect. I think it can be improved. One of the things we're going to talk about is how to improve it in specific areas of the law on my podcast. Okay. Simple fix from give me a legislative remedy if the courts are going to take away a common law remedy. And that's up to your representatives. And that requires political action and it requires work. So, the system functions as well as the people in it. That being said, if there's a better system than our current jury system anywhere, I suggest you read de Tocqueville. He'll tell you all about that. Okay.
6:09 Eastern Time, daylight savings time. I have no idea why I completely blanked on what the actual term is, but eventually the gray matter began to work. It's daylight savings time. 6:09 Eastern daylight savings time, and this is the Kennedy Effect live for the 12th of March 2023. I also have no idea, something's misfiring that I continue to keep forgetting what day it is. It's the 12th of March 2023. It's St. Patrick's Week. Happy St. Patrick's Day to my Irish brethren and sisters throughout the United States and around the world. St. Patrick's Day coming this Friday. If you intend to go out and celebrate St. Patrick's this Friday or over the weekend or even during this week, it's always a little bit more dangerous when St. Patrick's falls on a weekend. So I imagine it's going to be quite the weekend around the Lehigh Valley, New York City, Philadelphia, Morristown, New Jersey, and around, as George will attest to, Morristown, New Jersey, and around the nation. If you are going to be out celebrating, I encourage you to do exactly that. Go celebrate, enjoy, celebrate St. Patrick's Day. But by God, folks, I beg you, I beg you, I beg you, do it with some smarts, do it with brains. Please, please, please do not drink and drive. If you want to have a pint, have one. Also have it with dinner, have it with coffee, have it with water, have it with whatever you need to do so that you can get home safely. Uber and Lyft are always an option. Get a designated driver, walk, whatever it is you need to do. But please celebrate safely. Wherever you're watching on Facebook, That Other Side of Information is our home group Facebook page. If you have missed any of the first hour plus of the program, and not to mention the, terribly, terribly exciting pre-show program as I push buttons and click on things and things go ding. If you've missed any of that, youtube.com/That Other Side of Information is our YouTube channel. It's where you can find all of our recorded programs. And in fact, I've been very neglectful, to be honest, in the last 3 weeks since we came back from our very, very long hiatus, to be sharing the links from the YouTube back out to the other social medias. I'm actually way behind on that, and I need to do that. LinkedIn, the Instagram, and so on. I did remember to do a TikTok promotion a whopping 30 minutes before the program. I'd been so good about that for a while, where I was doing it the day before, then it was many hours before. I'm right back to doing it about half hour before. I need to get a bit more disciplined about that. But you can find us on all of these various, look at me being like a teacher here, pointing to the blackboard. All these various social media platforms, you can find us there. That Other Side of Information, TikTok, Patreon, YouTube.com, Instagram, all of it. That's where you can find us. And of course, right here on Facebook. So again, if you've missed any of the program, youtube.com/That Other Side of Information. Hot101.net, our name is our address, Apple App Store, Google Play Store, and the TuneIn radio app. And of course, you can tell Alexa to play Hot101.net and TCP, the TCP Media Group from Lancaster, PA. We will open up the phone line a bit later in the program. Line singular. Yes, he said singular because we only do have the one. But we will open up the phone line a bit later in the program. Our guest is our very first, wow, he said, very first in studio guest. It forced me to clean the studio, and yet it's still, I'm not going to show it to you because it's a bit embarrassing. Still looks a little bit like an old Radio Shack puked all over the place, and there are cables and things all over. George is probably giggling hysterically at this point, but we did actually clean, Kristen and I, today. So there's like open flat surface, which is pretty quite extraordinary because there really wasn't before this morning, or I should say after 12 noon, after Manchester United got done. But it ain't perfect, and there's still quite a number of cables around. Poor John walked in and said, well, this isn't bad. Like, you should have seen it. He's going to have a much easier setup in his place. But it is quite set up in here, and there's quite a number of cables and wires and power and lights and all sorts of stuff going on in here. But it did, having a guest in studio did force me to clean. I vacuumed my house. We cleaned and cleaned up this studio. So that's a good thing. But it is really fun to have somebody here in studio. That's why I'm not looking at you as much. My habit, it's our habit to always look the people. Well, it should be our habit to look the people that we're speaking with direct in the eye. So I keep turning over to talk to John. But of course, you folks are right there. So it's exciting. It's a neat day here. But we'll open up the phone line a little bit later in the program. You can talk to John yourself. We are planning to go at least to 8 p.m. because this guy has to get up at 4 a.m. to go to work. And boy, that extra hour, 8 to 9, is a killer as far as getting to bed and getting up at 4 in the morning and all that fun stuff. So we're going to go to at least 8 o'clock. Hot 101 listeners and everybody who's on our homepage, That Other Side of Information, please remember that Sergeant Mac, The Villain's View, comes up immediately after our program at 9 p.m. Eastern Daylight Savings, 8 Central, and 6 Pacific. The reason I had asked you about the Powell memo, for those folks, it occurs to me that I did not define the Powell memo. Lewis Powell was a conservative lawyer in the 70s. He wrote, I think the Powell memo itself actually goes back to the late 60s. I'm blanking a bit, where he wrote this letter to the then head of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, explaining how he felt that the chamber and businesses in general needed to get off the sidelines of politics and start spending their money inside politics, because the middle class, according to Mr. Powell, was getting too large. They were gaining too much wealth and gaining too much political power. And that if the billionaires wanted to, well, there were no billionaires at that point, which is interestingly, which should tell you something, by the way. But that if the top 1% of the time wanted to keep their wealth and keep their hold on political power, they needed to become involved in the political process, start making the right campaign donations, start advertising, start trying to convince the public that what was good for them was good for America. He did. The letter was so convincing, President Nixon appointed him to the Supreme Court. Why is it that you might not believe that that's not the initial modern day? Because we can talk about several declines of the Supreme Court over the years, reaffirming slavery, goodness knows how many times, reaffirming separate but equal. Why, in your opinion, is that not the beginning of the modern destruction of the court?
You're addressing that to me, I take it, Jeff.
Absolutely. You're the only one here.
I don't know whether you're talking.
I'm just being disciplined. I'm actually looking at the camera. Isn't that nice of me?
I think it's one of the factors, as I said earlier. Then there was the rise of Judicial Watch. I'm sure you're familiar with that right-wing group. They're
Larry Klayman. Yeah.
Unbelievable. And it was an overall movement, and I really think it culminated and got way out of hand during the Reagan era. That's what began it. Because and as a direct impact on myself and my clients, Ronald Reagan started appointing a lot of these Social Security judges and administrators, and they were all the single vein. They were very conservative. They cut out travel money for people and those sorts of things economically. So people with extreme disabilities had to travel in a car down to Philadelphia while experiencing pain. Those sorts of things. And no one questions anymore that somehow judges, at least at the federal level, are appointed based upon their political view, even though that's not expressed in court opinions. There was a brief respite. There was actually a time, and I'm no fan of Senator Toomey, obviously, but there was a point in time when Senator Toomey and Senator Casey were able to work together to appoint kind of judges in the middle, whether they were Democrats or Republican, and we have a number of those in the Eastern District now. But that hasn't been the tenor, and the guy that's most responsible for that sort of thing is Mitch McConnell, in my view, and that's just my opinion. He still owes us one for Merrick Garland, in my view. He's done everything he can to pack the court and was successful. And I agree with you. I think the court should be expanded when the Democrats had the power. They still technically have the power. As you know, the Congress can stand in the way of certain things, but Senate has the most influence with respect to the appointment of our federal judges.
Let me ask you
Biden's been very successful, by the way. I know you're aware.
Absolutely. Yes.
Most people don't know that, but on a district court and appeals court level, he has appointed more judges who are not these extreme versions that we see, either extreme liberal or extreme radical right, than even Obama was successful in doing. So
at the time of the authoring of the Constitution, one of the checks and balances the framers placed on the judiciary was the lifetime appointment.
Right.
The Senate has terms, House has terms, presidency has terms, the executive. The judiciary has none. But also keeping in mind that the life expectancy at that point was probably the late 50s, generally speaking. If you made it into your 60s, it was a pretty big darn deal. The fact that Franklin made it to almost 80 was a miracle. While it would take constitutional action, because it is specifically outlined in the Constitution that these are lifetime appointments, is it time to revisit the lifetime appointment of the judiciary, in your opinion?
I think it's a conversation, Jeff, worth having. My experience has been, however.
And I should apologize to you. I thought I was moving a more comfortable chair over there, but you are struggling, and I apologize.
That's okay.
I thought we were moving a better. Kristen and I moved that chair over there to like, you got to give John the good chair.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, I'll move it, but it doesn't appear to be working out that way.
No,
We
it's
don't
fine.
have very good chairs here in the
It's
studio.
fine, man. I'm fine. I think it's a conversation worth having, but my personal experience, both in federal court in Pennsylvania, federal court in New Jersey, state court in Pennsylvania, has been that age is generally not a problem, nor is we have a system in Pennsylvania where a judge gets elected on the state level. And then they have to stand for retention at a certain point. And then it's every 10 years. And that only requires more yes votes than no votes. There at least is a mechanism if there is a particular judge who, for whatever reason, needs to be removed. Okay.
Mhm.
It happens very rarely. And frankly, I haven't seen age. Some of the judges that I've dealt with, I don't know if you know this, but in the Commonwealth, we make judges retire at 70. They have to become a senior judge. They're then allowed to be a senior judge for 5 years until they're 75, and then they're done. Now, it's not like we have job qualifications like a police officer has to run X amount of miles,
Yeah, right.
whatever. This is a job that has to do with intellectual functioning, hopefully, judicial temperament, and an understanding of the law and the ability to deal with court cases for people. I've found that obviously, like everything else in life, the older judges generally have more experience. Why would you want to get rid of a jurist, for instance, the late Judge Griffo, who was widely acknowledged as a great jurist, President Judge Friedberg in Northampton County? Why would you want to remove those people because they're 75 years old? Doesn't make sense. Now, in order to change that, one needs to take legislative action. It also has always seemed to me, and it may sound crazy, but the very institutions that are supposed to protect against age discrimination are discriminating against their own judges, in my view, on an age basis. Lifetime appointments in federal court, you're talking about the need for a constitutional amendment to change that. It's difficult. You get a bad judge in the federal system. The only way to remove that judge is through the process of impeachment. No different. And last time I checked, before recent times, now that we've had a number of other impeachment hearings, there have now been more presidents impeached than there have been federal judges, I think. Don't quote me on that. Pretty equal number. And that's crazy.
Randall comments, it's not just McConnell, but the Republican game plan from Reagan forward. You did mention that, to pack these courts, especially with young in the relative sense, some in their 30s. When you have a lifetime appointment, you make it till you're 80. That's a hell of a long time.
Yep.
40 and 50 year long that you're sitting there. Some of these folks have never tried a case. That this was the plan. I've mentioned on this program before, from a big D Democratic point of view, a Democratic Party point of view, as destructive as it has been to this country and continues to be, one has to really marvel at the business acumen that the Koch brothers have used to purchase Congress. They didn't try to buy the Senate seats in California. That's expensive. The San Diego, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Sacramento television markets. It's expensive. In Pennsylvania, the Philadelphia and Pittsburgh markets, the New York market, the Atlanta market, right? They went after Montana has 2 senators. So does Idaho. So do the 2 Dakotas, which there shouldn't be anyway. They were only created, the Dakotas were only split to give 4 senators after the Civil War instead of just the 2 for the 1 territory. So they bought the Senate off by buying off the cheap states that they could buy off. And they did it in a very business-like way. It's cheaper to buy off Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, the 2 Dakotas, Iowa, than it is to buy California. Which, of course, when you do that, then you buy the state legislators, and then you gerrymander in power ad infinitum. That same theorem, that same game plan seems to have been put into place with the courts. Chris Hayes just mentioned on his program, I think it was last week. No, I take that back. It was Ali Velshi. And folks, if you're not watching Ali Velshi on the weekends, you really should be. That Leonard Leo with the Federalist Society is now a mega multimillionaire. His personal wealth has not just has gone up by about 20 times just since 2016. This is a concerted effort to pack these courts, is it not? This is not happenstance. This is a real plan.
Well, it's got less to do with the qualifications. I mean, you made a point earlier, right? Some of these judges have never tried a case. I mean, I had a case, an individual who was severely hurt while working on a universal gym. Cable snapped and he wound up having 3 fused discs in his neck. I think C2 through C6, maybe 4. I brought the lawsuit. I'm down in federal court in New Jersey. We had a brand new appointee, and she said to us, I don't know anything about product liability. You guys are the experts in this case, a federal judge. I mean, what do you say? Nothing if you're smart and you don't want your client to take it on the chin, okay? So, her whole history was banking. She had never tried a case that I know of, and that's a problem. Not all judges can be all things to all people, but at least in Pennsylvania, you have the ability to look at their qualifications and elect them. Now, that was a judge who was out of an appointed system. Federals are all appointed. So there's been a 3-stage plan. It's not only the Koch brothers. The NRA did the same thing in terms of where can I go and spend my money most effectively. All good things come to an end. I like seeing people now. Midterms taught me something. The election before that really taught me something. You talked about people who are 18 to 28. These kids are voting big D Democrat in red states at above 65%. Why? Because they're concerned about their top 5 issues: the environment, women's right to choose, gun violence, gender issues, right? They've lived with it. I mean, you and I went to high school, Phillipsburg, New Jersey, right? Were we worried about a mass shooter coming in? No. Many of these kids have lived with it, and the gun stuff. I mean, we could talk about that if you want.
Look, we start
with the Heller case, or what is the DC gun case, and the latest case brewed by Clarence Thomas is insane.
We talk a lot on this program about why or how are these young folks voting the way they're voting? How have they come to the realization that something is fundamentally incorrect in this country, given the fact that they have grown up in a country where they know nothing of the New Deal? They know nothing of the country between the post-war to, I happen to think the destruction of the New Deal started with Nixon, but really in earnest, it started with Reagan. And they're not taught about it, God knows, because one of the first things the Reagan administration did, of course, is to go after civics education. It's very, very difficult to complain about how your government works if you don't understand it, and if you're never taught anything about it. But yet these again, dare I say, if you don't mind me saying it out there, gang, these kids have come to the realization that something's fundamentally wrong with their country, and God bless them that they love it enough to try to do something to fix it. What is your, be it in your own family or in the younger people that you see in legal circles, what happened? What switch flipped?
I call it the pain and suffering switch. These kids have lived through school shootings. They see us, they are not, as a generation, as concerned about color. They didn't grow up with that sort of thing, gender, etc. So what they're seeing in real time, it'd be nice if we taught civics again. But what they're seeing in real time is they know students who have been shot, who've been wounded, who have been killed. They're seeing in every school an evacuation plan for live shooter drills. And that makes them think about the issue, like something has to change. They're seeing people who have been on the media attacked by law enforcement unjustifiably. They're seeing pain, they're seeing suffering, they're seeing things that are wrong. And when people see things that are wrong, they can sometimes only take a certain amount. Now, why was there, look, I'm a little prejudiced here. I'm a baby boomer kind of guy, maybe a leftover hippie, okay? I'm a liberal, progressive attorney, okay? Now, not everybody's like that. Everybody else who wants to be conservative, who has listened to Fox News, who has had this stuff drummed into them, it seemed to me that when the Vietnam War ended, okay, and Nixon resigned in August of 74, the world was all good again and nobody did anything, okay? So my sister, who's 3 years younger than me, and maybe it's a cultural thing, was listening to Donnie and Marie Osmond. I had been listening to Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, okay? So there's a difference in perception. The middle class was still thriving at that point. Things weren't tight. Nobody was talking about, destruction of our social welfare system, if you want to call it that. Nobody was calling Social Security, you work for all your life, an entitlement.
Mm-mm.
And, it goes back in my mind to the more radical elements of the Republicans. I mean, I remember Matt Taibbi wrote an article about the Tea Party in Rolling Stone years ago, explaining to people that there were 4 different branches of the Tea Party, which they didn't understand. And talking about it in depth. It's a brilliant article. If any of you have the time, go back and read it. And what he pointed out was that you would meet these people and they'd be the first people to ask you your political views. Bang, right? And if you didn't agree with them, whatever. So you had these forces coming together, in my view. The Tea Party, Fox News coming into its own, And then you had Donald Trump on top of it, okay? Donald Trump was a guy, we had guys like that you've known. They sit at the end of the bar in a factory town and they say the most incredible things, bad and bigoted and hateful. And everybody would go, oh, well, that's Rummy, he's just a guy in the community. Then we had a guy run for president of the United States, become president of the United States, who did the same thing. And that kind of political discourse following the Tea Party and the rest of it became normal. These kids now, I apologize for calling them kids, but these young men and women who now vote primarily Democratic, I believe, had enough pain and enough problems, okay, that they don't accept that anymore. Okay, they won't accept it. It will not be normal for them, and they don't want it to be normal for them. As B.F. Skinner said to someone, they talking about the famous chicken boy in Germany. If you've ever studied psychology, he was raised in a cage with chickens, so he was a chicken. He clucked and he acted like a chicken. And somebody said to B.F. Skinner, "Well, that guy wasn't normal," and he said, "You're confusing normal, okay." Is what society thinks, which are norms. In other words, it is what you grow accustomed to that becomes normal. So in his mind, the chicken boy was normal. Okay. Norms are what we expect from you from society. And when you destroy the norms, as we have politically, this is where we wind up. You can't, you were talking on your earlier what you called, so I will call it the same thing, your rant, which I agree with.
Which I don't do much actually, but this I just do.
Well, sometimes it builds up, but when you were talking earlier about that, what came to mind to me when you're advising people, and I've told them for years, look, Fox News is not news. There were actually at one point 3 hours of actual news in the 24-hour broadcast. I think it became less over the years. My friends on the other side think Tucker Carlson, Hannity, Bartolamo, Lou Dobbs, that these people were like the equivalent of a Walter Cronkite. Just ain't so. Okay. They weren't real reporters. And when you encourage them, I've encouraged them, turn it off and listen to something that is actual news. Do your own research, do your own facts. Guy that comes to mind is Voltaire. Voltaire said it is often difficult to free fools from the chains that bind them. And that is, in a nutshell, how I feel about people who just won't accept any other viewers. You might as well talk to the wall. See it, people who, you have a party who is now in charge of the House of Representatives, Congress. The controlling factions don't believe in governing. They don't believe in government. You made that point. They want to get rid of this, get rid of that, get rid of that. They don't believe in government. They're flirting with right now.
They're desperate to control it, but they don't believe in it.
Yeah, well, they're flirting right now, and maybe that'll wake up the financial people in this country with defaulting on a national debt. They don't want to raise the debt ceiling. They have no understanding what the debt ceiling is about. They think that's actually incurring debt. That's already incurred. You got to service it. But they don't get that. That's economics 101, So how do you get there? Maybe that'll be a bridge too far. There are some nice signs. I don't know if you saw this the other night. But a lot of senators from McConnell on down, guys who don't usually commented about Tucker Carlson. And maybe he's a bridge too far for them at this point. The story he did on these were peaceful visitors during the rebellion and insurrection on January 6th. When Mitch McConnell says you're off the rails, or Senator Kennedy from Louisiana says you've gone too far, that's really out there on the right.
Totally off topic, but if folks at home, if you want to watch something funny, and if I can find a link to it during the program while John's answering a question, perhaps I will find it. You need to see some old videos of Kennedy from Louisiana, where he has no Southern drawl whatsoever.
Oh, yeah.
Wears the suit perfectly, the ties all the way, because now the tie's a little undone. The suit little doesn't fit quite right. And the deep Southern all shucks, Andy Griffith sort of your uncle from down the street who still uses an outhouse sort of draw. There's video of him from not so long ago. In fact, I think as early as the early 2000s, where he is three-piece pinstripe suit, where am I getting that from? Tie up to here. I'm trying to combine words. Tie up to here, tie clip, the whole deal, and absolutely no accent whatsoever. None. Until he found a convenient state and Senate seat to be bankrolled to run for, and then he became good old Uncle John. It's mind-boggling to watch.
He channels his
it's
Huey
bar-
P.
it's-
Long, you know.
It's bordering on entertaining. If it wasn't so sad, it would be entertaining. It really would be. You've been, well, let me ask you about this first, because I want to transition just a little bit if I can in some semblance of order. It seems to be now that the preponderance of folks in Congress, and again, Congress, by the way, doesn't just refer to the House, it's both chambers. We throw around the word Congress to mean, I think to mean the House too often. Congress is actually both chambers, but to be a member of the legislative branch now, it seems that the overwhelming number of members are in fact lawyers. And I don't always think that that's a bad thing, but I don't know that it's a good one either. Why do you think that is? Do you have any thought as to why it seems that you need to be a lawyer to become a legislator? Like, there's very few doctors. There are very few. Jamal Bowman from New York is a teacher. There are very few teachers. Very few. Katie Porter was a professor. Elizabeth Warren was a professor. But the overwhelming majority seem to be lawyers. Nearly half of all the members of Congress, Senator Sanders will tell us, by the way, it's in upwards of 90%. But the official number is about 55%, are millionaires. Why?
I can't answer the millionaire. I can tell you about,
Even if
Well-
it's just your personal opinion.
well, I can look at it two ways. I'm going to use our General Assembly in Pennsylvania as an example.
And folks, forgive me for the sniffling. My nose is starting to go. I'm not sure.
About 30 years ago, people started saying, we don't want lawyers in the General Assembly. Okay. And they got their wish. There are now more doctors, more businessman is a prevalent profile out in Harrisburg.
Run government like a business.
Yeah.
Except that,
Problem is you write laws.
yeah, government also has monetary policy powers. Businesses don't.
Right. Problem is you're writing laws. So take a typical auto accident where someone is foolish enough to have selected limited tort as an option. They wrote the limited tort law, and what it says is a serious impairment of a bodily function. Now, I can tell you that a competent lawyer never would have written that, because when one talks about bodily functions, one is expecting someone to go to a restroom. Okay. So we now have to explain that to juries in those types of cases. I actually have written legislation. One of the acts was passed into law when I was at 3L working for a great guy named Michael Opake, who was one of the top Democrats in the Senate in Pennsylvania years ago. It helps to be a lawyer if you're going to write a law, number one. Number two, I think that statistic is probably overreported because many of the so-called lawyers in Congress in both chambers never really practiced law. They didn't do what I do for a living. Susan Wild is an exception. I tried cases against Susan. But many of them, law degrees are fairly versatile. Maybe they many of them with a law degree worked as lawyers in the legislature and then later became that. Many of them interned for a judge and became a judge. There are different paths to be taken. I don't necessarily think that being a lawyer is a better qualification for being a legislator who's going to serve people. Historically, it has been because of their ability to understand and write the law. They now have staffs. The problem with that is who's writing your law on the staff? Somebody who's out of law school 2 years. You know,
With their own political biases, by the way.
right.
The
So,
Congresswoman's chief of staff is a Republican.
right. So, you have a number of law clerks that come from the highest rated law schools in America who work for the Supreme Court currently. How could they have been in the same constitutional law courses I'm in when I'm in law school, and that we've all studied and countenance the kind of opinions we're seeing being written from the Supreme Court? I mean, someone like Lawrence Tribe at Harvard could state that more accurately than me, but how is it possible that you do this? And that all started going back to packing the courts. Probably the biggest influence on this type of opinion writing is the late Anton Scalia. Now, we all grew up because we actually had civics, if I'm not mistaken, right, Jeff, in school, the public school system?
I should be more clear that plenty of school districts in plenty of states still mandate civics education. The federal mandates were removed.
Exactly.
And so many states, especially, I hope you're all sitting down, everyone, because this will shock you, he said sarcastically, southern states were happy to see the end of the mandate, so then they stopped teaching it. So
Right.
I should be more clear about my statement about civics.
As well as many of the more conservative school districts in Pennsylvania.
Well, the
Where
northernmost Confederate state, as we generally refer to it here on the program.
Yeah, James Carville got in trouble for that, so I'm going to stay away from it, calling it Pennsylvania.
I don't do that, but I do think we are the northernmost Confederate state.
Well,
because I think large sections of the state are still fighting the war,
yeah.
as is the South, by the way, and they're winning.
Yeah, the bottom line is that if you take a look at people who do not understand civics and you put them in particular places of power, you're doomed to fail. Anton Scalia came up with a judicial theory of the Constitution called originalism. And what he's saying is if it isn't written in the Constitution, it doesn't apply. Now, of course, he used that conveniently. Someone once said to him, well, how could you possibly fund an Air Force? They're not in the Constitution. It says an Army and a Navy, okay? And that culmination of that type of thinking, and you can see it on full display if you read the DC gun case, Heller, where for the first time I'm aware of, he took another fashion of the law and said, well, the beginning of the Second Amendment is an introductory phrase. No one's ever said that about one of the Bill of Rights, let alone any of them, okay?
But let me stop you there, because Scalia is also very well quoted as saying that the Second Amendment is not universal. So for as much as he did to expand it, which he did, no pun intended, guilty as charged, he did also say it is not universal. So how do we square those two things?
Well, what he said is it's not absolute. You can't square it. No less a conservative justice than Warren Burger, who was a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and known to be very, very conservative. Who appointed him, I think?
President Nixon, I think.
Yeah, Nixon appointed him. He said
I don't think Nixon made him Chief Justice, but he appointed him to the court. But I think it was, oh, blimey. Was it President Ford that made him Chief Justice?
No, I think it might have been H.W. I'm not sure. In any event, bottom line with that type of situation is Warren Burger said, and I quote, there is no individual right to bear arms under the Second Amendment. Now, we had a history of cases, and that's why Anton Scalia said it is not absolute. I mean, we outlawed machine guns. Why? Because we had Machine Gun Kelly and Dillinger running around slaughtering people, and they were outgunning the police. Sort of the same today, isn't it?
Well, yeah.
You know, but he was the first to recognize, and again, a pure Republican vote versus Democratic appointments. Every time this happens, now everybody has the individual right to open carry.
In fact, recently the state of Iowa was trying to remove open carry restrictions for literally any breathing human being in the state. The children would now be able to open carry because God knows the gun manufacturers are not making enough money. Is there any way to separate out, or any way, maybe separate out is not the right words. Is there any way to frame this discussion in any other way? And perhaps I didn't complete my thought earlier about the Koch brothers' purchase of the Senate. That by purchasing the Senate, they purchased the judiciary. And by purchasing the judiciary, you get lifetime appointments of your people on the bench. That the purchase of the judiciary is purely now, it's an extension of the purchase of the Senate and the gerrymandering of the House to buy the House and to buy so many state legislators and governorships. And the Koch brothers, by the way, well, there's one remaining Koch brother, but the Koch network spends money down to the school board level, by the way. They have more permanent employees than both parties put together and cycle through more money than both parties put together. That these folks who have been put on the bench, especially by Republicans, are there not for law, but for profit. They tend to rule for corporations. They rule for gun manufacturers. They rule that chemical companies are not responsible for cleanup. They rule that, workers who have been injured is, it's not anybody else's fault other than the worker. They're there for profit at this point. If any of the three branches is as far down the fascistic road as any of the others, it would be the judiciary at this point.
Well, I don't know that I agree with that. I look at the House of Representatives and question how essentially 15 people who are far what I call rabid right, MAGA, President tends to call them MAGA Republicans, can control a body that's composed of over 400 people. So I don't know about that. I also
about 4 to
would
6 people control the Pennsylvania legislature too.
Yeah, well, that's now changing a little bit, thank God. But in any event, I wouldn't use the word purchase. I would say they've been very successful through Judicial Watch, Mitch McConnell, Koch brothers' money, in appointing people, judges who have a certain record. Now, it would help if they were honest when they're being confirmed, advise and consent in the Senate and they have hearings. Got an allergy problem going on, man.
I sure do.
Yep. But the
Trying not to share it.
yeah, the thing is, the only way to react to that is thankfully what President Biden has done in appointing other judges. Now, I mean, the most amazing comment to me, I'll be honest with you, when they came out with the Dobbs decision and they're interviewing some people, including, and my favorite one was Senator Susan Collins out of Maine. And she says in her voice, well, they said they wouldn't do that, I mean, look, in my view, and I'm sorry, and maybe it's rude, if you believed them when they said that, then you're too stupid to be a United States Senator, and somebody needs to do something on a voting level to remove her. They went after her a couple of years ago, and they failed to get her.
That was a big swing and a miss. That was a real...
They almost had her. She didn't win the whole lot.
Primed to have been removed at that point.
Yeah.
And the fact that she couldn't, I talked on this program a couple weeks ago about George Santos. The fact that he's in the House speaks as much about the Democratic Party as it does anything else. That in a district that President Biden won by 16 points, that a man who has lied about his about literally everything about his very existence could win that district says an awful lot more about the Democratic Party than anything else. Damn it, I forgot where I was going to ask. Crap, because I've thought about it twice now, and now I've lost it twice.
Elected versus.
Oh, I wanted to ask you. No, you mentioned Merrick Garland when he was nominated by President Obama for the Supreme Court in 2016,
Right.
and then Senate Majority Leader McConnell held that nomination for over a year. No hearings, no nothing. Constitution provides for advice and consent by the Senate for executive branch nominees. Why wasn't that advice and consent? Why wasn't the lack of advice and consent in and of itself? Were I President Obama, I would have sat Mr. Garland on the Supreme Court, period. If the Senate fails to do its job, is that not a form of advice and consent in and of itself?
It is a form of not having advice and consent. President Obama, however, does not have and did not have, no president has that power, with the exception of what they used to call lame duck appointments or interim appointments. If Congress goes on vacation, you can put a guy in the slot.
Which is generally held
Chose
for
not to
cabinet
do.
position
You can also,
departments.
yeah, if it can be done under the Constitution for that, it's arguably can be done.
But who's to say that President Obama did not have that power? It's never been adjudicated. So I'm asking you what is, I guess you would say, a hypothetical or in theory type question, because it's never been adjudicated. But there were several, progressive commentators at the time that said, as you read the advice and consent clause, that if the Senate makes a conscious choice to not provide that there's really nothing keeping President Obama from swearing in Merrick Garland as the next justice and having him seated. Now, I suppose the other 8 justices could have said, we're not recognizing this, the same way certain members of the House and Senate through the years have not been seated in Congress because of, various campaign finance scandals or whatever, bribery scandals and so on. The one that I'm reminded of, the name is going to escape me. The gentleman in Wyoming, and I think it was in the 19 teens, who sat outside when senators were still appointed by state legislators, stood outside the Montana state chamber and handed out $1,000 bills and bought himself a Senate seat. And the Senate refused to seat him because he clearly had bought it. But that said, how is a complete abdication of the constitutional duty of a Senate not in and of itself a form of that duty?
Oh, it can't be. The problem is that once his name was placed into nomination, it was sent to the Judiciary Committee where it originates in the Senate. He just failed to act on it. So he hasn't refused to provide advice and consent. He just delayed it, period. Now, it depends on what kind of executive
Even
you are.
when his
if you're
public-
giving him hell Harry Truman, you're going to appoint a guy and tell him
Right.
off.
See,
Obama would not take that political risk.
even when McConnell himself said, we will take no action on this.
Right.
That is a refusal. It's not a delay. It's a refusal.
Yeah, but the guy's technically still in the Judiciary Committee as a nomination to be acted upon when the Senate gets it on its business calendar, kind of deal. Won't let it out of committee and never gets to the floor. He never gets appointed. So the only alternative that I believe that could not be legally challenged was President Obama could have withdrawn his name at
Oh, I think
time.
it would have been massive. I think that if he had just sworn Merrick Garland in, it would have been challenged immediately. And I think that would have been a damn good thing.
Well, that's
Because
an
then
interesting.
some of these questions that seem to continue to linger and hang out there in our constitutional system, the 1972 Justice Department memo that a sitting president cannot be charged with a crime. Which is simply opinion, not fact.
I think it's 74.
It's never been adjudicated.
OLC opinion.
He hadn't. I don't think he had resigned yet. It was Nixon's DOJ.
I think it was in 74. Yeah. It doesn't matter. You talk about the OLC opinion. Yeah.
He never been adjudicated. There's nothing in the Constitution to say it. It's simply it's this opinion that we continue to live by.
Well,
Some of these things actually probably need to be adjudicated at this point, and that would be one of them.
One of Trump's challenges in the Third Circuit of Pennsylvania. Okay. They were citing the OLC opinion that you referred to. And if you read the opinion of the Third Circuit, you say, why are you citing this? This is of no precedential value. Now, where people get confused is obviously Robert Mueller followed that because he was operating under Justice Department guidelines. It's an internal opinion. You can't sue a president. It has no precedential value whatsoever in court, as pointed out by our Third Circuit justices. And it was, as you correctly pointed out, I think it was authored by 6 Republican lawyers who were afraid Nixon was going to go to jail.
Lawyers he
That's the
hired.
bottom line. And
Lawyers he had
in
hired.
retrospect, he should have gone to jail.
Yep.
And maybe we would have avoided some of what we're going through today.
I don't doubt that for a second. I don't doubt that for a second. We wouldn't have gone through the lack of accountability through Iran-Contra, there hasn't been a legally elected Republican president since Eisenhower. And about the only factual thing that Nikki Haley has said so far in her presidential campaign is that Republicans have lost 7 out of the last 8 presidential popular votes. It's about the only factual thing she's said so far. We are going to take a very short break, and we will be back in about 2 minutes. I actually hate this new tradition that's starting here, but health and things around this house are just sort of dictating otherwise. Quick break. We return in 2.5 minutes. This is the Kennedy Effect live for the 12th of March, and we will continue to be live in about 2 minutes.
Do you want a man for president who's seasoned through and through, but not so doggone seasoned that he won't try something new? A man who's old enough to know
and young enough to do.
Well, it's up to you, it's up to you. It's strictly up to you. While it's Kennedy, 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 Kennedy. Do you want a man with spirit who is not afraid to fight?
A man whose record shows that he will fight for what is right.
A loyal man who brings the job a fresh new point of view. Well, it's up to you, it's up to you. It's strictly up to you. 'Cause it's Kennedy, 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 Kennedy. And do you deny to any man the right he's guaranteed to be elected president, no matter what his creed?
It's promised in the Bill of Rights to which we must be true.
So it's up to you, it's up to you. It's strictly up to you. And it's Kennedy, 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 for me. Kennedy, 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 Kennedy.
Do you like a man who answers straight, a man who's always fair?
We'll measure him against the others, and when you compare, you cast your vote for Kennedy and a change that's overdue. So it's up to you, it's up to you, it's strictly up to you. Yes, it's Kennedy, 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 for me. Kennedy, 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 Kennedy,
Oh, wow. How about that for timing? I don't know what's going on, kids. Allergies are starting or something. And I know the dog was barking at ghosts down there. I'm sure you all enjoyed listening to that. Anyway, the Kennedy Effect returning to you. 7:05 Eastern Daylight Savings Time. If by some wild stretch of the imagination you have not changed your clocks yet, check them out. It is, in fact, 7:05. We lost an hour this weekend. Corporations got us again, man. It took an hour from us. 7:05 Eastern Daylight Time. Coming up immediately well, I shouldn't say immediately because I think we're ending at 8, but we normally go to 9. I think we're only going to 8 until my hours change at work and I start a little bit later in the day, which is coming within the next few weeks. We might be ending a little early because this kid needs to get to bed, hopefully, and sleep a little bit. I've been getting up at 4 in the morning to go to work. So normally when I'm done with a show, I'm wired. I'm energetic. I'm bouncing off the walls. I can't, especially when it's a really, really good show and I can feel in my heart and I'm my own worst critic. I will normally get off a program and say, oh, that was terrible. I should have asked this. I forgot to finish that thought. But occasionally I get done. I'm like, we nailed that one. And I am just ebullient with excitement. And then I tend to crash. But that sometimes doesn't happen until 11 midnight. And when I was starting, going back to working at the communications company, I didn't have to wake up till 6, 7 in the morning. That wasn't such a bad deal. When you get up at 4 and you can't fall asleep till midnight, it makes for a very long, cranky Monday. So we'll probably be ending at the top of the hour at 8 p.m., even though we normally go till 9. But please remember, that's a very long-winded way for me to remind you. The Villain's View with friend and family member of this program, Sergeant Thomas Mack. The Villain's View comes your way at 9 p.m. 9 p.m. Not immediately after we finish, but 9 p.m. on hot101.net and here, that other side of information. Not 100% sure if we're going to be with you yet next week. I don't know what the speaking problem is this week. Never good when the radio guy has speaking problems. Not 100% sure if we're going to be with you yet next week. Kristen and I have a chance to attend an event that's going to run into our airtime. So stay tuned to the Facebook page. We'll let you know whether we are going to be here with you or not. Our show for March 26th is already set. Some returning guests to talk to you about a very important event that will be happening at Pennsylvania's State Capitol building. And we'll be talking about that on April 26th. John Vivian continues to be our guest live and in studio. I haven't bored him to death yet. So live, we say on many levels, live here on the air, and John is still alive, in fact. And you can hear that Daisy the dog is alive too, because she's barking for some reason. She really does like to bark at things. She's really, really tough inside the house, and then you get outside. John got the barking treatment when he came today, and then once he got to the top of the steps to enter our place, he got licked pretty good, and he was very, very popular when he gave Daisy a treat. So that toughness fell by the wayside very, very quickly. Wherever you are across Facebook, that other side of information is our home group Facebook page. Stay where you are or come on over and join us. It has been a very, very quiet chat tonight. The live viewer numbers have been very low. I don't know what's happening with that. I know I was late with some announcements, but I know everyone got them because I got some complaints about them. So, but put your questions and comments in the chat. We have our last hour here with John. If you missed any of the program, go to our YouTube channel, that other side of information as well. Hot101.net, our name is our web address. Bluetooth it, stream it however you want to. Apple App Store, Google Play Store, and the TuneIn Radio app 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Hot101.net is on and available to you. Check it out. And remember, Sergeant Matt comes on 9 p.m. Eastern time on hot101.net as well, 8 p.m. Central, 6 Pacific, and the TCP Media Group. We continue with John Vivian till 8 p.m. I want to ask you, before we spend the remainder of the program, probably past 7:30, talking about what you expect to do with the with the new podcast. I want to ask you, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about your, not just your legal history, but your political history. You've been involved in the Democratic Party for a very long time. How has it changed?
Well, it's gone through a number of iterations. It depends where I was in my life. I originally was a member of the Democratic Party. I still remember I come from a long line of Republicans, but they were not crazy. My father and grandfather would be described as Rockefeller, Bennett type Republicans. I went to Louisiana, where I went to school at a very good academic institution, old school Western Mississippi called Centenary College of Louisiana. And I fit in because I was a Democrat, because at that time, people confused the Democratic Party in Louisiana, which spawned Huey Long, Earl Long, Morris Gillespie's. They confused that with those people being the kind of Democrats they know from up here in the East. They were Dixiecrats. In fact, when I went to Louisiana, there were no Republican primaries. Didn't have them. Everybody was a Democrat, from Russell Long right on down the line. The party has changed significantly on the East Coast, I believe, since I was younger. I mean, we always stood for unionization. I mean, the party I identified with was Robert Kennedy, Jack Kennedy. Barack Obama brought some of that back. Jimmy Carter, who was unpopular, was a fantastic president in history. We'll treat Jimmy kindly, I believe. I think that the Democratic Party has been assaulted and branded in a word of wars. Terms like
Liberal.
libtard, okay?
Making
That's-
liberal a dirty word.
Yeah, I tell people,
The
here's my favorite one, Jeff. I got to tell you this. I tell these people who I deal with on the other side, go to Roget's thesaurus and look up liberal and conservative. Figure out which one you want to be. Liberal is free thinking, open minded, etc. One of these synonyms for conservative is constipated, closed minded, and language does not lie. And since they've always used language against us, I think it's turnabout is fair play.
And of course, liberal coming from the Greek root word libre, which means free, which also leads to the modern English words library, liberty.
Yep.
And then hence liberal.
Right.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
in terms of how the
I'll go to that group.
right,
I'll be proud to be part of that group.
in terms of how the party can change and politically, I worked on Jimmy Carter's campaign down in Louisiana. When I was in Louisiana, I met a guy named Jim Carville who was way ahead of his time with things that we talk about today. I've been involved in every Democratic campaign, no matter where I was living, locally and canvassing, knocking on doors. I watch polls. First, I operated as a lawyer in the poll counting things, which is a great experience for anyone who can do it. I can't tell you how many people I have at least lectured, or sometimes I'll admit it, chastised, who are believing these election fraud things and how votes are counted when they've never been there to see it in action. It's a marvelous thing. So I've been involved in all those. I think I met you at the Sunken Valley Democrats.
Mhm.
I'm of a different belief. I loved President Obama. I think the First Lady, Michelle, should run tomorrow. I'd vote for her. But this, when they go low, we go high. You heard my opinion on that. No, you can't fight a war with a pop gun. Okay. And believe me, their use of messaging on the Republican side, their use of name calling, etc., on the other side, took its toll in the elections. The Democratic Party has now changed, and I think it started to change in the campaign between President Biden and Donald Trump. President Biden, tell me all the faults you want. Tell me he's, doddering, he's this. His record will be shown in history. The legislation he has passed, which, by the way, has benefited middle class more than anything done even under Obama, and not for a long time. Not since
Probably not since the Great Society. And
Yeah.
and data shows that it is over. I shouldn't say overwhelmingly. That would be a wrong choice of words. That it is inordinately. I'm blanking on the right word to use. I would say inordinately, more favorably favoring, unequally favoring the red states, which is the irony of it.
Well, the irony always is, why do people vote against their own interests? Okay. One of the few
Well,
things.
if you have an entire media machine lying at you, I mean, one of the great explanations of what Fox News is billionaires paying mega multimillionaires to tell the white middle class that the poor are coming to get you.
Yeah.
Except none of that shite is true. And I should say, does this not go back to what we were talking about a bit earlier? The Confederacy, because we have to stop talking about the Confederacy as if it was in the past. It still exists. It's still functioning. These states, as you just mentioned, were solidly Democratic. It was a very different Democratic Party. Admittedly, history tells us this. History is laden with facts. There's very little interpretation, I think, sometimes in history. We tend to put more interpretation into history than is due. So history tells us that the Confederacy was overwhelmingly Democratic. I get that. It is now overwhelmingly red Republican. Is it oversimplistic to say that it is Nixon's Southern strategy that made it that way? The embracing of the racists in the South to take them from Democratic to Republican.
I don't believe it is. And I believe when we talked about words, I left out.
So it's not overly simplistic to say
I don't think it is.
that the Southern strategy was the beginning of flipping the South from Democratic to Republican.
Well, two things that happened. Lyndon Johnson had a Civil Rights Act passed, and he was told when he did it, you're going to lose the South for generations.
Which has turned out to be exactly correct.
And, Nixon picked up on that and ran with the ball.
One of the biggest reasons
and
we
to
do
this
not have a
day-
national healthcare system right now is because too many
To this day,
folks don't want people of color to have healthcare.
and Trump brought it really
Yeah.
to the fore.
Yep.
The dog whistling, the use of bigoted terms, the painting of someone collecting welfare as this one always killed me. The person collecting
Reagan's
welfare is a
queen.
black person. Reagan did it too.
Yeah, Reagan's
Living in Philadelphia,
Yep.
who is probably using drugs and making illegal money on the side,
Mhm.
when the fact of the matter is that the largest recipient of welfare demographically in this country, you mentioned Kentucky,
Mhm.
happens to be a single white female between the ages of 26 living in a rural area with 2 or more children.
Steve
The one-
Ratner, who is very frequent, who is the Morning Joe economist. They've given him that lovely little title. He was actually an economist in the Obama administration. Mr. Ratner is certainly no Democrat, I can tell you that. I consider him to be a very blatantly corporatist and conservative economist. But after Marjorie Taylor Greene began to again profess for her sanitized version of a civil war called the national divorce, showed how the red states are bankrolled by the blue states, and how the red states would probably cease to be able to sustain themselves within 1 calendar year if they lost the infusion of tax money from the blue states.
Well,
But they're the ones that hate you, by the way.
one of
They're
the
the ones
few-
that hate all the blue states.
Yeah. One of the few things that I actually understood Chris Christie to say when he got into a little debate was he told Mitch McConnell and this went live on the air a couple of years ago. Look, man, Kentucky's a taker state,
Mhm.
and he's accurate.
He is
And
correct.
for people who don't know what that means, it means that all the money we pay as a state and our citizens pay to the federal government. Pennsylvania is not a taker state. New Jersey is not. New Jersey, for
Pennsylvania's
every dollar,
Right. Pennsylvania is about even.
yeah.
New
it is
Jersey
now.
loses money. New York loses money.
Right.
Connecticut, California.
Kentucky, for every $100 that they send to the federal government, they get back something like 125.
Mhm.
Okay. So I don't understand why, number one, these workers down there, particularly in the coal belt, in poor and impoverished areas, they vote for a party that abhors unions. Unions were the greatest boon to the middle class that ever happened. That and, Glass-Steagall that you talked about, where we could actually have savings that they couldn't gamble with on Wall Street like they're playing poker in Vegas with our money. And
And
unfortunately,
that's why they want the Social Security money.
yeah, they wanted that forever. If you remember when George W. ran, he wanted to privatize Social Security. That's always been on their mind. That would truly be criminal. So the Democratic Party has changed, I think, for the better, because I think Joe Biden, if nothing else, you want to pick a fight with him, he'll fight back. I think he has a right to call people MAGA Republicans.
Mhm.
He also recognized that not all Republicans aren't bad. There are still some left. Problem is, they're far fewer numbers than they were in our days.
Right. See, that's my problem with that. We continue to try to, I think it goes back to what you said about, sometimes we take the high road too much. Sometimes there's no damned high road to take. That does not mean, the old saying, when you, it's not swim with, when you roll around with the pigs, everybody gets dirty. I get it. But sometimes there's just no high road to take. The Charlie Dent Republicans there are none anymore. And Charlie Dent walked away. And even he, when you really look at his voting record, I wouldn't say there was a lot of moralistic voting in there either, by the way, simply because he was not an abhorrent personality didn't mean that the votes he was taking were correct or moral or anything of the sort. He simply wasn't an objectionable human being. It's a good start. It's a good start. There's precious few people who are not objectionable anymore. But geez, look at the voting. Look at the voting record. That's the thing. But with that said, Senator Sanders has proven, and he's not the only one. I think AOC has done it. Jamal Bowman has done it. Elizabeth Warren did it in her presidential run. Katie Porter has done it. Oh, darn it. The woman from the woman House representative from Kansas, who's the Native American, and I'm so embarrassed that I'm blanking on her name because I can see her face. The only Democratic member of the House from Kansas, and she is an indigenous woman, a Native woman. They did all this on small dollar donations. The average donation to Senator Sanders in both presidential campaigns was $37. So why are there still elements of the Democratic Party that seem to suck up to big banks and insurance companies, healthcare companies, big pharma, etc.? Why is that still? George tells me it's Sharice Davids. Thank you, George. You're spot on. You saved me from looking even more stupid than I can do all by myself. Thank you so much. But why does the party continue to suck up to these corporate interests when it's been proven we don't have to do that anymore?
I think you do have to do that. As long as you have money in politics, as long as you have Citizens United, if you want to continue to do what little you can do to help your constituents or do what you're taking an oath of office to do, you have to raise funds. And it's a shame. Look, everybody from Bernie Sanders on down has proposed a federal election system where you get this amount of money and we get this amount of money, and it's publicly funded.
public
And-
financing
and
of
public
elections.
doesn't mean ExxonMobil or the NRA, okay?
Right.
That would be the fairest way to do it. Is it going to happen? I hope so. My hope for the future is, Jeff, and I'm not bashful about it. My hope for the future is these kids that are 18 to 25 or sons like I've raised who vote, who participate, and who do the things they need to do. If you sit on the sidelines, trust me, the more vehement elements in politics, whether they're ultra liberal or whether they are MAGA Republicans, as the president refers to them, will prevail in the end. They're the loudest voice in the room doesn't mean they're the majority. And, you know, the high-low thing, they go low, we go high. We're at the point, and I think that's what this younger generation recognizes. How do you go high when they take away a woman's right to choose? How do you go high when they refuse to limit
I think
these weapons that are killing people right, left, and center?
Isn't it more though than just taking away women's right to choose? It was a denial of the entire principle of personal liberty and personal privacy.
No question about it. The late George Carlin walked away from a very lucrative career being a mild milquetoast comedian.
Yeah.
And he went on tour. There's a great documentary. If you haven't seen it, I think it was on HBO. It might have been on Prime. Watch it. And he came out in all places of New York in a conservative venue and he said, you know, the Republicans don't like you women. And this was a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And if you listen to his comedy routine, sometimes comedy finds its roots in tragedy. I'm a Shakespeare fan,
Mm-hmm.
so that occurs. What he predicted then, things that Lenny Bruce talked about a long time ago, are the same. And yeah, it's more than a woman's right to choose, but that's horrible enough. And if you read the concurring opinion in Dobbs by Justice Thomas, if you haven't, read it. He says this type of frightening.
It's frightening.
If you value liberty, you value the Constitution, you value your rights to America, you need to read that opinion because he says this type of analysis applies across the board because what they essentially said in Dobbs, which is Justice Alito's main point, since the word privacy is not written or bolded or appears in the Constitution, the United States Constitution gives you no privacy rights. And when these people talk about the founding fathers, if you'd have said that to Thomas Jefferson, he would have pulled out the pocket pistol that he always carried and he'd have shot you between the eyes. So don't tell me about that. You know, this country wasn't founded on religion. They tell all of these lies, and part of the problem is
Opening of the Treaty of Tripoli.
Yep.
Whereas the United States was not founded upon the Christian religion.
Yep.
In no way is, I always butcher it, where the United States is in no way founded upon the Christian religion.
Right.
And holds no animus toward they used a different word for Muslim at that point, which is not such a flattering word.
Saracen.
Yeah, it was. I don't think it was even that. I think there was something else
Worse than that.
Something we wouldn't use in modern times, but it was the general term used for Muslim at the time, and holds no animus toward the Muslim religion, and
right,
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In the Treaty of Tripoli, first foreign treaty by the United
what
States.
people need to understand is that you get a guy like Justice Thomas who writes something like that. How can you argue that there's not privacy in the First Amendment? Your very right to associate, your very right to vote, your very right to have free speech. You know, the Third Amendment, they can't stick soldiers in my house.
So if corporations are people, does that mean they have no privacy? They seem to have it.
Corporations are not people. Now, if you read, they said so in Citizen United.
Well, yeah, I think most people with a brain feel that way. But I'm just saying, why is it that what we seem to find is these ridiculous and outlandish decisions by this corporate Republican Supreme Court? Let's call it what it is. Let's not just refer to it as a Supreme Court anymore. I refer to the Republican Great Depression as the Republican Great Depression, because that's what it was referred to in general society, basically up to the late 40s. It was common on the street was to call it the Republican Great Depression. This is a corporate Republican Supreme Court. Why is it that the outlandishness of some of these decisions never seem to make it to the corporations, even though they're supposedly people? If the private citizen, individual citizen, has no privacy rights, why do corporations have privacy rights? Because they're people, aren't they?
They're not saying that they don't have privacy rights. What they're saying is that those privacy rights exist in your state constitution. The first guy to start that nonsense was Justice Rehnquist, who started citing the 10th Amendment. Now, what people don't understand is that a constitution essentially is a contract. If you've read Hobbes, Locke, then you would understand that. And that's what our founding fathers read. The 10th Amendment says, if we don't take any rights here, they remain with the states, basically. It's what we would call in a contract a savings clause. It didn't stand for anything, but he began using that. So the problem today is that when people raise the corporate thing with me, I'll say, okay, well, if corporations are people, and how come I can't sue them like I sue Joe Smith, the citizen?
Or why can't they be
can't
charged? Why can't they be charged with murder when they kill someone?
They sort of.
Why aren't they in court the same way that if I drive drunk and I kill somebody, I'm in court?
Yeah, they charge corporations criminally now. You'll see that in the news in certain aspects. The problem is you can't put ExxonMobil in jail. So the criminality comes out in the only thing they understand, which is fines. And usually the fines are a pittance.
Right.
I mean, they'll publish, they fined, ExxonMobil after the Valdez, I forget what it was like 15 million or what. Are you kidding me? 15 million. That's like taking 2 cents out of my piggy bank or yours. Okay. So if you're intending to give them a lesson, that's not it. Okay.
Randall says in the chat, yes, Jimmy Carter will be remembered as one of our greatest presidents. I don't know that I would go that far, but history is going to be much more kind to him than his time in office. Randall, who is a 70-plus-year-old, 40-plus-year Democratic committee person in Delaware County, and my favorite hippie, went door to door in Delaware County the weekend before the 76 Democratic primary for President Carter. Also mentions President Biden held his first fundraising gig after announcing for president at the Comcast CEO's home here on the main line, where he stated that nothing would fundamentally change for the rich class. I think he has actually gone back on that, to be honest. The budget, he did a very, very smart thing this week that I did not get to mention yet, and that is his proposed budget dramatically raises taxes on the top 1%. Actually, really more than that, probably the top 2%. And corporations, anyone making more than $400,000 a year will see a dramatic increase in their taxes, as will corporations, which means he's gone back on that very, very well publicized statement. And believe me, it was a statement that I was an Elizabeth Warren person during the campaign leading up to the 2020 election. I thought she was exactly what we need. First off, I think it's well beyond time that this nation have a female president. It is a statistical and data-driven, scientifically proven fact that nations with female leaders are better run. Let's just be blunt. It's the truth. It's been shown all over the world. The education systems run better. The budgets are better. The people are happier and healthier, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Look at the recent resignation of Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand is a dramatic and a real blow to democracy throughout the planet. Trust me, that will come back to bite us. But there's a reason
she went after guns, man.
She sure did. And there's a reason why the Nordic countries, Scandinavian countries are so well run. They're all run by women. But that said, this president has been the most progressive since Johnson, easily. History tells us that. And I can make an argument even more so. At least economically, I don't, Johnson, of course, we have the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, and President Biden has not made those social inroads as of yet, but the economic ones, yes. And all of it's been paid for. And he's actually reducing the deficit. Isn't it funny how his budget proposal came out this week talking about tax increases on the top 2% and corporations, and suddenly now Republicans don't seem to care too much about the deficit. They just don't want to see taxes increased. And why don't they want to see taxes increased? Because they don't want the taxes increased on the people that own them. This is why I consistently on this program, and Sergio just mentioned in the chat, amen, and I thank you for that, that the Republican Party is not a functioning political party anymore. There's only one functioning political party in the United States. I could argue that there's two, but it isn't the Republicans. They're not the other ones. The other ones might be working families, or maybe even the Greens, although they're not terribly functional at the moment either. Republicans are a corporation. The employees are the party structure, and the people in office, the owners, are the corporations in the top 1%. And the only thing that Republicans seem to care about is getting more and more money into the pockets of those corporations and the people at the top. If you are not generating money for those corporations, or they can't extract anything else from you, go die. We'll make more that look just like you. That's not a political party. No platform, no plan, no guidance, no leadership, no future, no nothing. That's not a political party. That's a corporation. We know who the owners are. We know who the employees are. We're the buyers. We don't have to buy it anymore. We don't have to. How do we make our purchases as consumers of republicanism? At the ballot box. So let's stop buying and put this corporation out of business. It's not a political party, folks. This is where the unevenness in this fight comes. When Democrats are constantly beaten down about their messaging. And I'm not exactly at the head of the pack on that, but I'm damn close to the front. It's hard to win a messaging battle against a corporation. Who's got the better advertising tagline, Coke or Pepsi? GM or Ford? Kleenex or Puffs? Maytag or GE? The Democratic Party or the Republican corporation? When you have no policies that you stand for, it's pretty easy to throw any kind of message out there. But when you still believe in science, facts, data, and the truth, you're restricted a bit. So this messaging fight is it's not as simple as we all think it is. The truth matters. And your messaging, when it is, I don't want to say restricted by the truth, because everything should be held to the truth. But when you hold yourself to truthfulness, it can be a little difficult to argue back against nothing but lies. And that's how we open the program. Nothing but lies. When Fox goes in open court and says we lie, that's what we do for a living. It's how we make money. We lie. We just say lies. We lie to people. Messaging back against that isn't always easy. It's not always simple. John, why is the Second Amendment, why do Republicans think that the Second Amendment is more important than all the others? And I could make an argument.
I don't know that they do. I think they've been taught that through centuries of the NRA. For your viewers who don't know about the NRA, I was an NRA member. Right up until they opposed the Omnibus Crime Act that was proposed under President Clinton's era. That act contained within it the Violence Against Women's Act, the assault weapons ban that for 10 years kept mass shootings of the type we see every other week now at an all-time low. There were things in there about outlawing poison throwing stars, and they opposed it because the NRA has always believed, apparently at that point, when I was younger, they were all about hunting safety, sport hunting, etc. They've spent countless money. We always believed you couldn't go against the NRA. They proved in the 2020 and again in the midterms that the NRA is not sacrosanct and you can oppose them. Why people believe it's absolute, I don't know. It certainly isn't. None of the Bill of Rights or first 10 amendments, no amendments are absolute, with the exception of age to vote, perhaps.
I had I shouldn't say an argument because the conversation itself was very civil, at least in its tone, even though the gentleman I was having this discussion with continued to get more and more exercised as we
Hopefully you have
progressed.
his gun on. Go ahead.
We were at a World War II reenactment at Jacobsburg,
Okay.
and he's a former DOD official, Army all his life, all this stuff, on and on and on. You liberals and take my guns and blah 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 blah. And I just said, look, I said, find me. Offered him my own phone. Go ahead, show me, find me the Democratic elected official anywhere in the or candidate for that matter that wants to come door to door and take your guns. Tell me, show me right now. Of course he couldn't. And I could see that I'm not going to separate myself from this conversation. So I needed a way out. So I asked him, I just stopped and I said, look, you and I are clearly not going to change each other's opinion on this, but the discussion has been relatively respectful, at least for my part. And I appreciate that, because if we don't talk to each other, we don't solve anything in this country. I just want to leave you with one thought, which I think is the basis of my positioning on this, because I fired weapons. My father had an attic full of weapons. He was a collector. He also served in the military for 37 years because he was actually trained how to kill people and how to operate a weapon rather than just buying it because he thought it was cool or because Sylvester Stallone shot one full of blanks in a movie. And I said, why is the Second Amendment the one amendment that overrides all the others? Why is it the one that is, even by default, even if this whole debate didn't even exist, more important than the others, especially of the first original 10 amendments? And he said, well, it's not more important. What? Oh, but it is more important. You've made it more important. You believe it is sacrosanct and that it is much more important than the other 10 or, well, 9. Why do you believe that? I don't believe that it, but you do. Do you think it's more important than freedom of speech, right to assemble, right to petition your government, jury of your peers, illegal search and seizure, on and on and on and on? No, of course not. I said, but you do. And I'll tell you why. Because the Second Amendment is the one that can deny you access to all the other rights. Of course it does, but it does. Because what does my freedom of speech mean to me when I'm dead? And you want the unabashed right to kill everyone.
I don't know that I would go that far.
You want the unabashed right to carry your weapon around, and if you happen to get pissed off, to use it.
Well,
and that denies me my rights. But you don't care about that. Your right is more important than mine. So you think that the Second Amendment is the one that overrides all the others. And at the end of that exchange, he had nothing to say to me. And I said, and as he stood there in silence for a good 60 seconds, I said, I know I'm right, but it's not about that. It's about that you haven't thought or taken the time to think that your lionization, your canonization of the Second Amendment is the thing that denies other people their other rights. You think it's above the other ones. You defend it more than the others. Well, and maybe that's where our disagreement lies. Not whether you can carry a pistol on your hip, but the fact that you think that that's the one that's above all the others.
I have a little different spin on that, and I'll let your audience know that I've had a permit to carry a concealed weapon since I was 21 years old in Pennsylvania. I hopefully never have to use it. I've had actual death threats in my legal practice. We actually had a guy come in with a gun into our offices when my late law partner, Gus Melitis, and Marty Cohen, who still practices, and we were all together at Wolf Avenue, right across from the courthouse. I own a number of hunting weapons. I own a number of handguns. I've been trained to use firearms. I've dealt with them all my life. And yet I have a certain view about guns, and tell you what it is. It doesn't give anybody the second right to kill another human being. I don't have that gun because I have a desire to kill human beings. I have that gun because occasionally I'll go down to my office at night in Easton, and it's not such a great neighborhood, and there are shootings
No, it
that
isn't.
go off. Okay. Now, that being said, the problem with most people that feel that way about the Second Amendment is they have been inundated by the NRA, who no longer, by the way, represent sportsmen. They represent, and they are the voice of the
manufacturers.
gun manufacturers, period. Okay. There are some simple things we can do. No one, and I emphasize this, no one, and I'll debate this with anybody, needs a 223 platform semi-automatic military grade weapon, period. Not for home defense, not for any other reason. Okay. There are 9 simple steps that I would propose, and I'll tell you the background story. I represented an individual in a bank robbery and killing spree that occurred up in Bath off Airport Road. The perpetrators being one Martin Apple and one Stanley Herzog. My client's left arm will never work again in life because of the injury he sustained. 4 people were killed, and a woman named Marcia Hauser, who was represented by, I believe, Phil Hoff locally, lived with a .357 slug in her head. Okay. Those weapons that were used were purchased illegally under a 3-day waiting period back then for a background check. In fact, when Marty Apple filled out the application, it said, "Are you now or have you been convicted of a crime, blah, blah, blah." He checked yes. The employee looked at him and said, "If you check yes, I can't get you a gun." He crossed it out. He checked no. He said initial it. 3 days later, he went back, bought a 9mm .357 Magnum. 9mm wounded my client, killed 4 people, and the .357 put the slug in Marcia Hauser's head. Okay. Now we have InstaCheck. Okay. And while at least there's been some gun legislation passed minimally under Biden, it's far from what it should be. First of all, I'm far from a liberal, obviously, because I own guns, I use guns, I hunt. Okay. Bottom line is this. When you determine that an 18 to 21-year-old is fit to have one of these weapons of war, and you're assuring the American public, as they did politically, well, we're going to do extended background checks. That tells me as a rational human being that the background checks you're doing now are garbage. Okay, garbage.
By default, it tells you that the ones we're doing are not good enough.
Right.
Right.
You have these laws.
It's like new and improved.
You can get turned down. You can get turned down to legitimately purchase a weapon at 5 licensed firearm dealers. You can go Sunday to Ag Hall and buy one from a private citizen. Okay.
Yeah, which is
You need a
know.
clip limitation. Period. We had one. It works. People who oppose this, including some of my relatives, will say, "Well, how's that going to matter?" And I point to the Gabby Gifford case. 27 shots the kid got off, right? Who's to say if there were only 10, maybe Gabby doesn't get one in her brain, maybe somebody doesn't get killed. Okay.
Yep.
If you need more than 10 shots to defend yourself, my advice is to you, do a little more target practice. 2, get somebody to do your shooting for you. 3, get rid of the weapon. Open carry laws, which are an offshoot of the DC gun case Heller. it's crazy. I've had guys sitting at what used to be Starter's Pub on 378, sitting there with a gun hanging out of his holster. I could have pulled it out and shot him with it. You know, why do you want to carry something open? Kids walking around with slung 223s with 50 and 100 shot banana clips. There has to be some sort of rational recognition, as you pointed out. The Second Amendment is not absolute. And if you're going to allow in a civil case where my client has a post-traumatic reaction from an auto accident, for you to delve into completely their mental health records, then I got news for you. If you're going to give somebody a weapon, mental health should be open, period.
You know, to talk about, to just circle back to messaging a little bit, I think that's the simplest thing that we can do in this open-ended, unfettered, quote unquote, Second Amendment debate. Weapons. Guns almost sound like toys. They sound like things they use in movies. These are weapons. They're killing weapons.
Yeah. The purpose of a firearm, a weapon, is to kill.
Right. It's a weapon.
Whether it's an animal, whether it's in self-defense.
Well, that's a very simple thing to. It doesn't demonize anybody. It doesn't make anybody. You know, it's a weapon. It's not just a gun. It's a weapon. It's a killing machine.
You should have education. You know, as a hunter, some of my boys hunted. 2 of them didn't. One's a vegetarian and one was raised on Disney, I suspect. And that's fine. You know, I'm not making anybody hunt. I'm not making anybody buy a gun. I canvassed your viewer who texted in from Bucks County or whatever media.
He's going to call in about 2 seconds as soon as I turn the phone on.
I canvassed in Freemansburg for Obama's first election. Okay.
Talk about taking your life in your hands.
Yeah. You know, and I had at least 3 people
now.
come
it wasn't
to the
very
door.
good there.
I had at least 3 people come to the door and go, Obama wants to take my guns away. I said, man, that's not true. You know, and 1 out of the 3 I could get to listen. I say, have you checked out Obama's rating with the NRA? It's like a B+. He wasn't taking anybody's guns away when he was a senator, okay?
No, that was Wayne LaPierre at the
and nobody is coming for your guns.
2007 NRA National Convention.
If you have enough guns, I think you now have 3.5 times the guns that you do American citizens or something crazy.
We have 4%.
But you have enough to give every citizen 1.5 firearms, and that was about 5 years ago.
We have 4% of the world's population. We have 27% of its privately owned weapons.
Nobody's going to go take away your guns, okay?
Right.
And that's just, again, that's messaging, which is based upon fear.
Mm-hmm.
That the NRA and the Republican Party have propagated.
All right, Randall, go ahead, sir. When you're ready. He's going to call in a second. I love him. He's the most loyal listener there's ever been to anything. And he stumbled upon the program. It's like a lucky, happy accident. Happy accident for me. I don't know if he thinks it's a happy accident sometimes, but it's a happy accident for me. There it goes, right there. As promised. I think I got it that time. Oh, come on. I keep clicking on it. There it goes. There's my favorite hippie. I knew you. I will tell you when I'm turning the phone line on. You don't beat me up in the chat. Tell me to turn the phone line on. Darn it.
I'm sorry, but George.
My name's still on the show. Darn it.
I'm sorry, but George puts up the Kennedy.
Well, yes, I know.
And says call in, and I'm sorry.
Let me. I will say live on the air what I told you in the chat. Google Voice is free, right? It's a little free piece of software that John will end up using probably for his podcast as well. It's a free little piece of software. It's what we use for our dial-in number. The fact that it works, let me back up. The fact that it runs on this computer makes it, from an audio standpoint, what we need to use to get all the audio together to go to all the different places that we need to get it to go. If I just gave Randall my cell phone number and I held it up to here, there are certain places where we send the show where that he wouldn't get heard. So it's a little complicated. And the same thing that if he asks a question of a guest and they try to answer him, he's trying to listen to the computer, which is 20 seconds behind, and he's not hearing anything. It's very confusing. So Google Voice works very well for that. But what Google Voice was created for was to gather marketing information. And they sell the phone numbers. And so this phone number recently got sold. But thank God they added a feature called a do not disturb. So when I sit down to do this show, I reboot the Google Voice, which is just as simple as refresh and make sure that it's working. And I see a couple hundred calls.
Wow.
Because they sold the number, and I'm now getting calls, multiple calls per hour from all over the planet 24/7. So thank the living God that they added a do not disturb, or else my phone would be ringing. You know, the 8 hours, 9 hours that I'm at work, I would probably be getting 24 and 50 something phone calls.
Wow.
So I have to keep the do not disturb on until I'm ready to receive phone calls. We're lucky. Well, the good thing is that, and again, Google Voice, by the way, only lets you take one phone call at a time. We don't have multiple lines. There's software for that. I can't afford it.
Right.
So we use the free one. So Randall at this point is blocking whatever these other things are from coming in. So that's the only good thing about that now. So I will turn the phone. Here's the bottom line, you hippie. I will turn the phone on when I'm damn well good and ready. Gosh darn it.
Capitalize it hippy dippy. Okay.
That's right. Anyway, Randall, you probably have a question of Mr. Vivian. Please, the airwaves are yours. Ask a question.
Yes, I have a zillion questions, and
you
get that 70.
You don't get a zillion. You get one. You get a couple less than a zillion. Because I said I was going
a zillion all through listening.
I said I was getting off at 8, and it's 7:57, and now I'm staying here late for you. You big Delco hippie. So ask your question.
Yeah, the question is, and I want to go back to the guns. I'm on another page here from a friend of mine in Delaware County that is open from left, right, coconut. And there's a lot of gun nuts on that page. And us on the other side, we try and counteract. There's a lot of nuts on that side that, Joe Biden is a criminal and should be put in prison. Anyway, it's crazy. Side issue real quick, Jeff. The reason Biden might have decided to be progressive against the rich in his projected budget was knowing it could never pass under the Republican House, and he just looks good to progressives and middle class and working class Democrats, but he doesn't have to worry about giving a tax increase to the rich, to the corporations. I'm just throwing that out. Might be wrong. Doesn't matter.
Well,
anyway,
first off, you're never wrong. I'm wrong. You're never wrong. But that said, that's not the worst idea I've ever heard. But let's also remind ourselves that late last night, or was it Friday night? Might have been Friday night news dump. No, it was last night. I correct myself. It was last night. There was a news dump last night. Usually there's the old tradition of the Friday night news dump, things that an administration wants to put in, is required to put into the public, but doesn't really want anybody to know about. Last night, it was reported that the Biden administration has given approval to an oil drilling scheme
In
in
Alaska.
Alaska.
And I'm so, as an environmentalist,
Yeah.
going back to when I was a Boy Scout, and when it was called conservation, then going to the first, my senior year in high school in 1970, spring of 1970, the first Earth Day at Fairmont Park in Philadelphia. First Earth Day in this country, the world. And then we were worried about water and air pollution. Not toxic chemicals until the 70s, and it was not Love Canal in New York that started EPA Superfund. No, it was the Wade dump in Chester, PA, predominantly a black community, and you had 555,000 55-gallon drums of dioxin, and the list goes down. And every first responder, every police officer, every firefighter, every ambulance person that showed up, they all died in their lives long ago now of multiple cancers from exposure of that fire.
Yep. And as you actually messaged to me, I think it was last week, that dioxin is one of the primary components, if not the primary component, because I'm not a chemist.
The primary of Agent Orange.
Yeah, of Agent Orange. Right.
They cause cancer, yes.
Anyway, I drug you off in a direction. Please ask John your question, because I'm not staying on the air for much longer.
John, I agree with a lot of things you have said tonight in this discussion with Jeff, but there's a lot of things I disagree with you on. And one of those things I disagree with you on is when you said Citizens United. That was not what gave constitutional rights to corporations. Citizens United is what gave corporations the right as like an individual to spend unlimited amounts of money.
Correct.
To support a philosophy, a candidacy, whatever. It was, I can't remember what Supreme Court ruling it was, but it was in 2013. Was it 2013 or earlier? That the conservative, the Bush majority ruled that a corporation has the same constitutional rights as a full-blooded human being.
Under the First Amendment, correct.
And Jeff,
Fourth
was
Amendment
right.
specifically?
Under the First Amendment in terms of free association.
Corporation CEOs and board of directors cannot be sent to prison. It's absolutely insane that they cannot be sent to prison, because they should be able to be sent to prison. If I can be sent to prison for murdering somebody, the board of trustees, the CEO, they should be sent to prison. Truman said it true. The buck stops here. And that should stop with all these corporate MFers that continue to
Thank you
kill.
for editing yourself.
Well, the one way to get them, perhaps, is to use the RICO statutes against a corporation. However, we haven't seen a great deal of that out of the Justice Department. Whether or not that'll change under Merrick Garland remains to be seen. Because in any criminal case, when you talk about any criminal statute, whether it's on a federal or a state level, except those things they want to convict you of all the time, there's an element called mens rea. You have to show that there was intent, so to speak, and thought that went into it. So the problem with going after a corporation is the CEO says, hey, I didn't know the board was doing that. The board says this. I mean, look, I deal with these people in discovery in major civil suits. So I think, they charge them criminally, but the only sanction is a fine. And I happen to agree with you. When someone knows that this stuff is going to harm people, and many of them are toxic tort cases where it occurs, I believe the people who made that decision deserve to go to jail. There are statutes in place which do that. But the only way to really do it, I think, is to use the RICO laws that are in place.
So what is
I,
the,
I was a fire marshal most of my working life.
Mhm.
And in 1992, when the private owner of the chicken plant in North Carolina chained and padlocked all the exit doors in the factory to prevent employees from stealing chicken. And 57 employees died in that fire because they were locked in. And I thought, this is going to change the law finally. Well, that was 92. Here we are in 2022, and nothing's fucking changed. Excuse me for using that language. I apologize, Jeff.
you're suspended until next Sunday. What was the case that Randall's talking about? Because maybe I am misunderstood as well. I thought it was the Citizens United is legalized bribery. President Carter himself called it legalized bribery. Referred to the United States live on the
They
Tom.
talked about you are correct. They did talk about the Fourth Amendment in Citizens United also, but they were rambling. What they've essentially said is that a corporation, and is it Randall?
It's Randall.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Randall is correct on that. What they've said is that they have the same rights under the First Amendment in terms of free association, political stuff that a person does, which is kind of interesting because when they want to defend corporations, not only in the federal venues, but in the state venues, okay? Well, they're not a person. In order to get personal liability in a civil case, we have to go through this exercise called piercing the corporate veil to get individual liability. I've been successful in doing that in 4 or 5 cases, but they really have to foul up their corporate lawyers to leave them exposed for that sort of thing. In other words, if you're not running the thing like a corporation and you don't get the protection of the corporation, but in order to do that, the burden is on us to pierce the corporate veil. None of that was discussed in Citizens. They basically said, corporations have the same right as people. And as long as that kind of money is allowed out there, I mean, even with small donors, which have been great, and Obama proved it could work. I think he was the first guy who showed that small donors could work. Okay. You're still outgunned. You're bringing a squirt gun to against somebody who's got a 223 Bushmaster. Okay. I mean, it's a drop in the bucket. It was a drop in the bucket for the Koch brothers. Now I'm the Koch brother.
Yeah. Well, the network is still there. Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And they also fund with what I love to call dark money, because that's what it is, right? They fund all these other organizations,
Oh gosh, yeah.
So I
Well,
look
it's all
at a
part of the
political,
network, right?
yeah, I look at a political ad.
Heritage
I
Foundation.
go, who are these guys? The new one, right?
The Commonwealth Foundation here in Pennsylvania. There's the Heritage Foundation, but there's one in every state.
Right.
Some of the larger cities have their own. Broad and Liberty supposedly is part of the Koch network. I don't know that 100%. I've been told it's a Koch network thing, although they actually seem a bit too far out there even for the Kochs, but I've been told that they're funded by the Kochs. So what else you got, Randall, before I get out of here, or before I hang up on you and suspend you for dropping an F-bomb?
Again, Jeff, John, you missed my point. In 1992, a individual business owner who had owned a chicken processing plant in North Carolina, it was a limited liability corporation. Okay, he wasn't a corporation by stock selling on stock exchange, et cetera, et cetera. But he decided to prevent thefts of chickens by his underpaid workers that he was going to padlock all the double chain and padlock all the double exit doors around this big plant.
Right. They do the same thing in China. With the,
Fire broke out and 57 people couldn't get out because they died of asphyxiation. I thought, well, sure as shit, our legal system's going to have to finally change and hold these murderers accountable. These money murderers accountable.
Right.
And it never happened, and it's not happened to this day.
I got your point, Randall, and all I can say is that happened up at Jandal's. The individual who did that, who locked the doors, can't hide behind corporation or anything else. He should have been indicted and charged by whoever the district attorney was or the lead law enforcement official in that county. It may well be that, look, I spent 3 years in the South in Louisiana, and it is the South. Okay.
it's proper.
Saving grace was I got out of college in 3 years. Okay.
Proper
I look at a case like that and I would suspect a couple of things. Obviously, this guy was probably very wealthy. There may have been payoffs. I mean, that's not unusual in the South back in that era. Still not unusual, unfortunately, in
Mhm.
not only the South, I don't want to pick on that, but in other places too. It's more likely people get caught doing that today, and they need to be defrocked. If I live in that county and there's 57 people who were killed, I mean, I'm all over the DA. I'm all over the state police, everybody else to charge these people. If it wasn't done, it's likely the guy had a lot of money. But, it doesn't mean just because it's a corporation was in charge of something, if the person who physically went and did that is committing a crime. It has been that way, spring gun cases, people want to protect. You can never protect property by the use of lethal force. And that's true in every state in the United States. So if I have somebody breaking into my hunting cabin in Pike County or wherever I'm at, right? And they're stealing what I feel are valuable mason jars, I can't string up a shotgun so that when you open the window, lethal force is vested upon you. It is never justifiable to use lethal force to protect property. So if that occurred down there, that's exactly what's happening. I had a very similar case. I had people were riding motorbikes, as kids are wont to do, on a railroad access way up in Northampton, around the Northampton borough. Conrail got tired of it, or whoever owned the rail thing, and they strung a cable across there so that when they come down, they could decapitate some people.
Oh, wow.
Again, case never saw the light of court. Luckily for my guy, got hit in the chest, and the injuries weren't fatal, but they screwed him up for a very long time. That kind of conduct leads itself and lends itself to punitive damages in a civil suit. And no one ever charged anybody at Conrail with criminal conduct in doing so. But I said it should happen. DA didn't see it my way. I'm not the elected law enforcement officer in Northampton County.
We've got the first Democratic elected attorney, county. What's the
District
elected
attorney?
office?
District attorney.
District attorney. And he's up for his second term here in November. He's been endorsed, so I know he's going to win the May Democratic primary here. I voted at the endorsement. I voted against him, endorsing him. Why? Because he made a deal under the table with Delaware County's FOP that he would not charge 3 police officers who murdered a 8-year-old girl here in Delaware County. He would not charge them with murder. And what did he get for that? The FOP here in Delaware County, which, police are predominantly Republicans. They're going to support him to run for the state attorney general office. And I don't like, even if you're partially corrupt, there's a lot of things I like about Jack that he's done as district attorney, but there's this issue I absolutely cannot accept. The deal he made to go on to higher office. And Jeff, you should look into this, Jeff.
And Randall, if that's accurate, okay, partially corrupt in my view is like being a little pregnant. Period. Okay.
Yeah.
And if
you gotta either are or you're not.
Yep. If that's true,
I shouldn't laugh. It's a serious topic.
If what you say is true, you have every right to your opinion, and you should go after that guy and spread the word and exercise your First Amendment rights. And Jeff told me a little about you being a leftover hippie. I am kind of too. So
spirits.
We're never ever shy about doing that, and we shouldn't be. I'm the guy that says, don't go high. There's some things you just can't go high about. You take away privacy rights. They've restricted civil rights in this country every time they get a chance in the Supreme Court. They don't have the guts to say, hey, we're repealing the Civil Rights Act in 1964. But
so they do it incrementally.
They do it incrementally. They started with a case called Twombly. The federal system, not to be overly technical, is a notice pleading system. It was designed that way. Okay. They do a case called Twombly and they said, well, all civil rights actions have to be specifically factually pled. Well, what's the problem with that? Well, the problem with that is there's no mechanism for pre-complaint discovery under the federal law. So what we now have to do is we'll file in the state where we can file a summons, make them produce things, and then move to federal court. Okay. After Twombly, I could cite, the standard is deliberate indifference. When a cop beats the hell out of you, as you've seen since Rodney King, it hasn't changed. Okay. You have to show deliberate indifference, on top of which the police automatically start with a good faith immunity defense. Okay. Why?
I got beat back in the early 70s when I had hair down the middle of my back by Rizzo's Gestapo cops in Philly. Oh, I know. And then the 4.5 years I went to college in North Carolina from 70 to laying off, and graduate in 75 outside of Asheville. Yeah, the only good thing I did down there was I helped marijuana convicted people that had got 20-year sentences for a joint in North Carolina. I helped them escape over the mountains to Tennessee.
I wouldn't be saying that on
radio. Yeah, I wouldn't be saying that on radio.
Why not? The statute of limitations is gone for that.
Well, still, some things are better left unsaid.
But statute of limitations are gone. It's only murder, etc., that are lifelong. I'm proud of that. I am proud that I helped
it reminds
good people that got 20-year sentences in North Carolina for a joint. I am proud of that.
Remember, it was Nixon's chief of staff, Haldeman, that said, when he was asked, why did you make marijuana a class 1 drug? And he answered and said, you had these college kids protesting President Nixon all over the country and protesting the war. So we couldn't arrest them for being black. We couldn't arrest them for being Hispanics weren't the percentage of the population than they are now. We couldn't arrest them for being women. Couldn't arrest them for having premarital sex. We couldn't arrest them for protesting. Couldn't arrest them for even, for even avoiding the draft. But we could arrest them for drugs. So we did. And that was the birth, in my estimation, that was the birth of the prison industrial complex. You only got a couple seconds left. We need to end.
My generation growing up in the late 60s in high school and early 70s in college. That's why Tricky Dick, the government always has money to fight drugs. but they only have X amount of money to fight drugs. So they can only fight X amount of drugs, this drug or that drug or whatever drug. So everybody in college, in high school and colleges are doing up drugs. They're doing marijuana. They're doing amphetamines. They're doing methamphetamines. They're doing LSD.
Yeah, I think
They
they
are
targeted it because it was so widely used.
Then the two brothers, the two chemical masters and chemistry brothers in California, they're producing 99% of the good LSD in this country get busted in California in the spring of 72. And what was released in the spring of 72 that flooded and stopped all protests? Quaaludes, downers, flood the country, let the country be flooded with downers to settle down the high school, the college students,
Hey,
etc.
let me
And that's exactly what history did.
Let me ask you a question before I hang up on you, you nut job. My favorite nut job. How are you feeling? I know you weren't feeling well for a few weeks. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling a lot better.
All right, good. Is your wife feeling okay?
Yeah,
Good.
I have my youngest daughter and her husband living here now. They're selling their house. They're going to move to North Carolina. She's due any time on their first child, which will be my sixth grandchild.
Ooh, geez, you're not supposed to get that wrong. Okay.
Yeah.
No, I know you guys were like handing back and forth as cold for a while. Just want to make sure everybody's all right. We need to wrap up, sir. I'm going to talk to you soon. You stay out of trouble.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John, for coming here and being with Jeff and expressing your thoughts, because you have some great thoughts, and I respect you, sir. And Jeff, obviously, I respect you. So God bless both of you, and good night.
Hey, you stay out of trouble down there, please, and stay healthy. Last few minutes before we wrap up for 8:30, tell everybody anything that you want them to know about the podcast coming up. Where can they find it? When are you starting? When are you debuting? Where can it be found? Where do people find you on this grand, weird world that we call social media? Just the floor is yours for however long that you need it, and then I will say goodbye to you folks in about 7 minutes.
I won't need 7 minutes. I'm and will admit a complete.
You don't even have a working title yet, I don't think so.
I do have a
Oh, good,
title,
good.
And I actually, as of today, before I came here, got a domain name.
Hey, there he is.
I didn't even know what a domain name. No, I knew because of my law
big time
practice site. No, it's going to be called A Barrister's Corner. And
That's fancy stuff.
Well, and the tagline is injustice for all. My webpage will feature a nice statue of Themis, goddess of justice, who's blindfolded with the scales. And we're going to explore a number of things about the civil legal system, warping it into issues like we talked about today: women's right to choose, guns, on and on and on. I've tried cases in all of those areas. It'll be podcast on primarily Apple Music. I'm not sure of all the other RS feeds. We expect to be on Spotify and the rest of them. I haven't yet decided whether we're doing video. I'm at the stage now where I'm still waiting actually for my headphones and 1/4-inch cable.
I'm just glad you can afford all the podcasting outlets, because I have to admit, when we started this and someone asked us, George and I, April, everybody involved in the program, I think they might have even called in. I can't remember when we had this discussion. Why can't I find you on iTunes? And I thought, well, that's a very good idea. Why don't we just do that? And we were all like, okay, cool. We'll start posting to iTunes. And then George said, hey, did you know you had to pay to do that? I'm like, no, I had no clue. And it turns out we couldn't afford it. So you can't find us on iTunes or Spotify or any of those places. We can't afford to post it there.
Well,
I think you used when it first started. I think you could post for free. Now then they started charging people. Now that there's quite literally multi-millions of podcasts out there, I think they start charging for it, and that's Apple makes a good chunk of change on that. So it's not in our budget. So
we're gonna check that out. But I have a website that allegedly is going to give me RSS feeds for everybody else. It's like $20 a month or something like that. So it's not going to break my budget.
is it your hope that the podcast is going to inform people, not just of your stories, but how those stories can affect them and how they can learn about the law, how we may not all become lawyers, or again, to borrow the British term that you brought, or be barristers or be, even law clerks or interns or anything like that, but that how we can learn a bit more about the law and how the law literally, and we're simply because we go through a day and don't get pulled over by a cop doesn't mean that we're not affected by the law. Our lives are dictated by it.
Right. We're going to do nuts and bolts presentation of what the case is actually about. I'm certainly not going to get into finer evidence points, motions and limines we may have filed in a matter, sanctions we got from the court and what happened. We're going to talk about the facts of the case, and we're going to talk about the things that impact severely and or prevent people from advancing their rights when they're injured through no fault of their own, be it by civil rights, guns, auto accidents, medical malpractice, police pursuit cases, etc. I've tried them in all areas. We're going to have actual people on who have been victims in those cases, in both successful and unsuccessful cases. And more important, what we want to do is we're going to have a portion of it that deals with expert witnesses. We're bringing in opinions from some of my journalism friends as to how journalism could help here, or how, for instance, and I'll say it plainly, in Cummings, they fell down. They didn't report it to America. So we're going to have a lot of women who are horribly raped, who will not have much of a recovery. And no lawyer is going to put $25,000 into a case for experts where you can't recover what the damages are.
Right.
So you're leaving them without a remedy. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to have an action, hopefully, and we're calling it call to action. It's similar to what you attempted to do here. Call your legislator, stop listening to Fox News. Here's what you can do. Here's what the legislature can do to remedy this. Because it's the only solution if the courts have taken away rights, is to get a statute, because courts are supposed to enforce the statutes under, particularly in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Statutory Construction Act. And we'll talk a little bit more about that on my program. I really want to thank you for having me on the program and give me this opportunity.
Well, I will tell you the same thing that
we haven't yet published a webpage. So
okay,
here's the deal. I'm going to stack up.
What about this evil Facebook thing? You doing that? Or any of those things? Any of these?
I don't do Facebook, and it may morph into a video thing. Right now, it's truly in its infancy. My plan is to have banked hopefully half a dozen episodes, which, as you know, is a lot of work. And hopefully release it by August 1st. I haven't yet published my webpage. It has to be edited yet. I'm not real good with the effects, but I have kids who are real good with that stuff. But then again, they can't work a slide rule, and I can. So the way that goes.
Well, I will tell you the same thing that we tell every guest here before we sign off, and that is, I have bad news for you.
What's that?
You're part of the family now. And especially since you can walk here, we will be calling on you again. I cannot guarantee you a more comfortable chair because it's not in the budget. If I cut George's pay anymore, he's going to be paying me. 0 from 0 is still 0. The famous line from Animal House.
I remember.
Mr. Blutarski.
Isn't this great? Yeah.
0.0. If I cut George's pay anymore, we're going to be into the negative. But you are always welcome here.
Well,
and if you have anything that you need to share with our audience, if you don't even want to walk over or Zoom in, call in, whatever, tell them it doesn't have to be 3 hours, 3.5 hours. It could be a quick 5-minute hit, like, look, folks, you need to know about this. Please, the keys to the castle are here. You know how to get to us. And, please don't let this be the only time you come and see us. I very, very much like to consider everybody that has been gracious enough to visit us here a family. We've had a lot of repeat guests, and not too many, actually, come to think of it. Or, it's not from an entertainment point of view, not always good to see the same faces over and over again, especially this one. But it's, we've had a lot of good repeat guests, and I just hope this isn't the only time that you come visit us. The door's open. You know where to find us, and I look forward to that next time.
You got it. Thank you much.
For our guest, John Vivian, for Randall, our loyal caller and loyal listener, and you better take care of yourself down there, sir. Stay healthy. Because I know about this little cold thing, because I've still got it, and that makes oh goodness, now how long does that make? Probably 3 months. No, 2-ish months. Yeah, it takes a long time. That said, I don't really have a lot much to add to you for right now. I would simply say, as far as next week is concerned, the 19th, again, Kristen and I have been invited to a political event. I do not know if we're going. If we go, I won't be here because the event runs into our airtime. But these events don't always schedule themselves around my show. So sometimes we have to go do these things. Please keep an eye on the Facebook page. We'll let you know if we will be here or not. We will absolutely be here on the 26th. Our guests will be Dave Pope and Janelle Crosley, who are about the most bad bum trans advocates you could ever, and activists and advocates you could ever find. There's going to be a very sizable pro-trans youth, trans support, insert proper term here, event at the Pennsylvania State Capitol in Harrisburg on the 31st of March. I better make sure I have that. Yes, on the 31st of March. They're going to come here back to the Kennedy Effect on the 26th to tell everyone about it. What else do we have? I think that's about it. So make sure you change your clocks. This kid's going to be in bed in about 90 minutes, if not sooner, because 4 a.m. comes really quick. And so we will see you very soon. Again, I'm not 100% sure about next week, but keep an eye on the Facebook page. We'll let you know what's happening. You can find us on, wait, I'm going to get this. I'm going to cheat. Okay, so it's Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Patreon, and TikTok are all that other side of information. There's really not too many places that you can't find us. So keep an eye out. We're all out there. If you missed any of tonight's program, please go to YouTube. George will work his magicked. I added a syllable there that doesn't belong. George will work his magic within the next couple of days. Probably by Wednesday, it'll be on our YouTube channel. He never takes that long, but I always give him more time because he's not getting paid. So it'll be there by Tuesday or Wednesday. Every episode we've ever done of this program is at our YouTube channel, youtube.com/thatothersideofinformation. So if you missed any of tonight's program, go to any of the places that it's been shared on Facebook or go to YouTube. You can watch the entire thing from the beginning. For Whitney, Marquise, Andrew, Taekwon, everyone at the TCP Media Group, for DJ Lexus, DJ Earl, and everyone at Hot 101. And remember that The Villain's View comes up at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 8 Central, 6 Pacific. For April Riddick, my sister from a different mister, whom is ultimately responsible for all of this. This program would not exist without her support and her guidance and her leadership. For my dear friend and associate producer Lynn Dare, and my technical producer and my dear friend for 2 decades now, definitely a very low line on his CV. George Dare, and of course, my partner in everything, Kristen Volchansky. I am Jeff Kennedy. Thank you so much for being part of the program this evening. We will return, and just keep an eye out. We'll let you know when we'll be back. We'll definitely be here on the 26th. We'll let you know about the 19th. Until next time, please take care of yourselves. And you can't find the place to click. Smooth, right? Really smooth. Please take care of yourselves and each other. God bless. We'll see you next time.